stars be with you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Energetic Principles podcast. My name is Melissa LaFara. I'm an astrologer, tarot consultant, all-around creative here in San Diego, California. And I am so happy to welcome back Gray Crawford to the program in what will be our part two episode of the astrology of 2025. Thank you for joining me, Gray, again.
Yeah, glad to be back here. We have a lot more to talk about, even though we've already had an extended discussion at this point.
Yes. So if you have made it through our 3.5 hour podcast that we previously released a couple weeks ago, you'll be hopefully ready for more because in this podcast, we're going to talk about the Cancer solstice season, basically the second half of the year from solstice to solstice, which incorporates our, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, our summer season, our fall season, and then a little taste of what the beginning of winter looks like and how we are led into what will be 2026. Oh my gosh, Gray, I can't get ahead of myself like that. I'm still reeling over 2025. I'm like, how? How?
Yeah, I
It's
mean, reeling isn't a bad word. I mean, there's um just gonna like we've already talked about, this is just a time of just incredible change. And
incredible
so
change.
we're gonna not get too much. There's definitely some unavoidable mundane topics that come up with some of the, especially the second half of 2025 to bring up, but we're not here, telling what we think are going to be going down on world events, and try to focus us more on how you can personally relate to these cycles and create some positive change for yourself.
I love that. I love that. Because at the end of the day, we're working with a lot of mutable placements. So who's to say what we might know? There will be trends and there will be inklings, but there's so much up in the air. And so I love that focus,
Yeah.
Gray. That helps us work
Yeah.
with how we can empower ourselves through this time period.
Yeah. And as we talked about last time, there's things, we can look at past cycles of some of these ingresses, but there's so much with this configuration coming in that we got to be open to new possibilities and things not playing out the way we might be projecting ahead in our minds we think it's going to go, because it could all go in very many different directions.
Absolutely. I mean, we learn from history, right? Knowing history helps us not repeat it. And so maybe that's why we say some things of like, this is what happens, but it's not to say
Yeah.
that will happen. It's more like this could happen. And because of that, let's be aware of that because we essentially get to hopefully have some creation of our reality. So, yeah,
Exactly.
I
Yeah, and
love
that,
that.
that's that gets us really to one of the main things we'll talk about today, because we didn't really talk about it all in the first half, is that entrance of Uranus into to Gemini, which is so widely known for anyone that's spent any time looking at astrology and the history of the United States, that the United States is involved in wars at some point during the time of Uranus and Gemini. It's of course the Revolutionary War occurred with it. It was happening during the Civil War. It was happening. World War II was already happening, and as the United States started moving towards that, it was going in and it came back out. And while still in Taurus, is around, I think, the Pearl Harbor, but as it goes back in, like the United States is then into World War II and joining that world war that was already happening. And that's one of the things that's out there that a lot of people have concerns about. There's also even a cycle of Jupiter in Cancer, that the Sun, the 83-year Jupiter synodic cycle. Well, it's like a synodic cycle. It's not quite the same, but same basically idea that repeats itself. And so that is goes pretty similarly to the Uranus cycle, and that's coming up this year. The July 4th chart will have a Sun, Jupiter, and Cancer, like in that Sibley chart
Mhm.
declaration, and that also kind of lines up with that. And where we're talking now, there's a lot of potential fears around this topic, and so this is where it comes in, where we might talk about some possible things, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. And hopefully by bringing awareness to things, and we can hopefully have those things not happen, or not happen in such an extreme way.
Mm.
And that
And
being said, the
mm.
Saturn Neptune that we already started talking about, I'm really, it could go in so many different ways that we're just gonna have to see. It's yeah.
You know, Gray, what you made me think of is sort of the idea of ancestral work, right?
Yeah.
Because the nature of ancestry is that
Hmm.
as we're handed down, the scenarios or archetypes of the past and these traits that we take on from the people we're related to, it's at some point, hopefully, the goal to break a particular cycle. So maybe it's my high-minded side of, of things that perhaps that you know, three Uranus in Gemini transits is a charm, and now we're going to be on our fourth one as a nation,
Yeah.
and maybe we'll break the cycle. We'll just have to see. We'll have to see. But
And
it's good to be aware without fear, right?
well, the ancestor connection is, I think, a great one, because we can also think about all the things our ancestors went through. And even though the technological aspect of what is going on now is not something we really see with recent ancestors, they had, their own enormous crises and catastrophes and apocalyptic, people having that on their minds. That's been going on for a very long time. People seeing that they're thinking and seeing, perceiving that they're living through an apocalyptic scenario.
Hmm.
So that is something that we can draw strength from in relation to, yeah, what our ancestors have already been through and what we're going to be facing. Just a definite,
Yeah.
very critical time is going down these next 2 years as we transition into this whole next rest of this decade into the early 2030s is really big for the astrology.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, it's only human to experience some of the things that we're talking about. I think that's part of the human journey. And so, um, it, ideally, we wouldn't have to live with it, but I think that's what makes us us, and that's part of, just human nature. And so, we'll see how that fleshes out. And that's the exciting part of astrology, right? We're looking ahead at things, we're tracking cycles, we're using our imaginations and our intuition and a little bit of history from the past. And so, dare I say, we're going to have fun with it today as we kind of think about what could potentially pop off here in the second half of 2025. And as Gray has already mentioned, we're going to start with a little bit of an overview, like we did in the last program, and this time focus a little bit more on Uranus and Gemini, give Jupiter in Cancer a little bit of more of a moment than we rushed through in the last program, and do a little touch up on Saturn and Neptune, who will essentially station not too long into, the second half of the year to then go back from Aries into Pisces, and that is a big move. We're also going to talk a little bit about our first set of full eclipses in the Pisces Virgo axis. So we'll really be in a different eclipse environment. And that will be huge too. So, Gray, any one of those enticing subjects feel good to start with?
Well, I think with regard to Uranus and Gemini in the second half of the year, that's really that is like the biggest new thing that's going to happen. And as you mentioned, we talked about this some last episode, but the big change happening in the first half of the year is the entrance of Neptune into Aries. And then that is followed, that's around March 30th. And then later, towards the end of May, but just about 2 months later, Saturn comes into Aries. And then not too long after that, in June, Jupiter goes into Cancer.
Yes.
That Saturn and there is then a Jupiter and Cancer contact to the Saturn Neptune. They're all at the beginning of these cardinal signs. So that's very powerful. We talked some last time about how powerful these 0 degree cardinal points are that are considered very much kind of world axis. I think about it very much as like is really connecting us into the world soul in some way, that things really manifest usually pretty strong into reality. And one thing I've been thinking more about since our last talk, just because it got me thinking about what I said and didn't say, and it's nice to have this other extra
Opportunity.
opportunity to talk a little more now.
Yeah.
If that always happens after doing one of these episodes, you think about all the stuff you could have said. But Neptune in Aries is such a big deal, and I've been thinking about that more, and especially when as much as what I tune into, which isn't obviously comprehensive, but I feel like my impression is there is a lot of attention on Pluto and Aquarius, and there's been a lot of attention on Uranus and Gemini. And we will talk about Uranus and Gemini, but that Neptune in Aries is such a big deal. And the entrance of Uranus and Gemini is going to be very strongly connected to this because after we have I'm sure we'll look at the solstice chart in a moment, but the solstice chart, when the sun enters Cancer now, it'll be forming a square with Neptune and Saturn actually in Aries. But Saturn will move on. I mean, there'll be other ingress charts after this that are also contacting Saturn in Aries. But for years, for most of the rest of this decade, most of the ingress charts, which we use to forecast sometimes the whole year ahead and at least a whole segment of the year, Neptune in Aries is going to just be there. So like the solstice chart this year, Sun square Neptune. The Libra ingress chart this year, Sun opposite Neptune. We'll talk about it goes back to Pisces, but then next year, Aries ingress chart, Sun conjunct Neptune. Cancer solstice chart, Sun square Neptune. Libra chart, Sun opposite Neptune. Capricorn chart, Sun square Neptune. That's just going to keep happening. So not only, I just think anyway, Neptune Aries is a big deal because it's hitting that zero Aries point and that movement from this inward nocturnal dreamscape of Pisces and being open to all these influences. And it's been wonderful in some ways, but it's a dramatic threshold from Pisces to Aries. And there's such a sort of chaotic formlessness. It's this point of very much like primordial birth. We have that if we project the stars down to that zone, it's like where the Pegasus constellation comes down, kind of the Pegasus erupting in one of the versions, out of the blood spilling of Medusa.
Mm-hmm.
But Pegasus being this sort of like image of a leap and flight, and there's lots of images like that, something emerging out of this watery abyss, and there's like this light. And Aries is all about speed and movement and change. And so much is going to happen with this, and it'll create so much more movement. And as we talked about last time, it's important to be aware of our ideologies. There could be big movements sweeping people up into Neptune can really make us merge with larger groups and merge with larger movements. Fire is really traditionally the most spiritual element. It rises up. It's all about divine inspiration and merging with spirit. And we also have here the exaltation of the sun, which is that force of nous and oracular revelation. And there's so much that can change, I think, with this like exaltation of the sun. I mean, makes me think too with Neptune, some sort of these like solar idealism. In some ways, that could be with like figures trying to take a lot of power. But we have all these other things going on, which this could be people trying to take power. There could be all these breakthroughs with insights with like energy sources, trying to replicate the power of the sun. And so forth. And this is all happening in a context of this age of air, which is the cycle of the Saturn-Jupiter cycle playing out, which is already creating much more movement and dispersal of things. and great technological change, things in that air symbolism. We've been in this long cycle of Saturn, Jupiter, and Earth, which is also much more heavier and rooted down. And there's an interesting shift of that Earth age to like things being in the air and lifting up and movement. And now everything's like up in the cloud. We're storing things in the cloud, and the things are in the air, and there's air waves and
Yeah.
sound waves and things moving around. And that what Pisces water to the Aries fire of Neptune, it's such an underlying force. And I think one of the things people miss with Neptune is how important Neptune always is. I know it can lead people astray into illusion, but when there's actual real movements of people creating change, you always have to have Neptune involved. You have to have Neptune. Neptune is what brings people together, and Neptune inspires people. Neptune is what lights a fire under you for this dream and inspiration. It's Aries. You can't get more than that in that way. So the combination of that really can set things off. And so we have right when Uranus comes into Gemini, we have Neptune stationing, and then within that week, Uranus enters Gemini, and then Saturn gets a little bit closer to Neptune. They only get 13 arc minutes away, and
So
then
close.
Saturn stations retrograde. And so the context of Uranus coming into Gemini is the Saturn Neptune being right there, and that's really unusual. That's the part where I don't know of another total configuration like this, because not only is Uranus coming into Gemini with that sextile with both of them, but then we have Pluto over here in Aquarius forming a trine to Uranus. So we have this, again, age of air. Now we got Uranus and Pluto in the air signs, really putting us much more into this. You can look back at history and you'll find some of these combinations. There's definitely different cycles with Pluto and Aquarius and Neptune and Aries. That would be, for example, the Copernicus revolution, which is interesting, again, I think, with Neptune exalting the sun, and we get this heliocentric revolution that happens. Henry VIII with, interesting, he's marrying Anne Boleyn. He's giving birth to who becomes Queen Elizabeth, and he's taking down the papal authority of the church, but he's also claiming great power for himself, which is something potentially we're seeing in the United States, depending what happens. But we don't know what happened, but there might be some pretty serious executive branch power grabs. At the same time, the president saying he's creating freedom and breaking up these other things.
Well, you got to
Um,
run the ruse of the Neptune, right? I mean, that's
yeah,
kind of part of it is like, and that's definitely, I mean, the example you're laying out right now is, I know we're not in Neptune and Aries territory yet. Gray and are recording this right on the Mercury cazimi as Mars is about to go retrograde. And, big
yeah.
news this week was the potential power grab that happened in South Korea.
Oh, right. Yep.
That was massive, of kind of like what you're talking about right now. And
Putting
so we're
down like
seeing these,
martial law.
putting down martial law to in the guise of protecting the people, but a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
were like, no, you're putting it down so that you have complete
Mm-hmm.
control and power.
Yep.
And that is, we see right through you, right? And so when you were talking earlier about Neptune and Aries and this idea of like how it brings people together to inspire towards creative change, it's also the key component that can dissolve what actually is.
Yes.
And that's the power of it, I think, is that dissolve the inspirational quality, but the dissolving quality. Because if we do want a world that looks different, in the structural component, which I think Earth has built us to this, especially the Pluto and Capricorn transit, it has created these rigid um, structures that are unbalanced to the people in many ways. Like this is where hopefully that Neptune Saturn action and Saturn being in fall can dismantle some things that we're not crazy about on the high side of things.
Yeah, and it can dissolve, but keeping in mind that it is, and Neptune will dissolve things, but keeping in mind that this Neptune in a fire sign,
True.
there's going to be more of this ignition. I mean, we have it, Neptune and Sagittarius people have it in their charts and will relate to it quite well in that way because we're finally getting Neptune back in a fire sign for the first time. But if you think about the 70s, there's like the Iran Revolution, for example, that kind of revolutionary ferment. And like back previously, there was a Saturn Neptune, that was a Saturn Neptune square, the time period. But there was a Saturn Neptune conjunction in Leo, 1917. That was like the Russian Revolution. Um, so, and also think about the 70s with Sagittarius. I always think about that period of like punk rock and hip hop coming in. There's just like you have this fire quality that's definitely gonna be dissolving things like Neptune will do, but it's going to really be sparking things.
Yeah.
And there's going to be this movement that we're not used to. And it makes me think Neptune and Pisces has been really great for disseminating astrology, and the astrology field has just completely blown up with people. Um, and there's so many people that are into astrology that I feel have only been into astrology since Neptune's been in Pisces, and sort of like the water they're just used to swimming in, just thinking about astrology. It's really gonna be different, is all I'm saying, when Neptune's really in Aries. It's a big shift. And it's gonna create movements in ways that when we throw in Uranus and Gemini, now so that's also happened before, and a lot of people like to bring up the Civil War. Uranus was in Gemini at the beginning of that, and Neptune came into Aries like the day after it started. Um, but also keep in mind that the Civil War was building for a long time. It almost a decade earlier, it almost happened. And we people like to say, "Oh, we've never had so much polarity in the United States." That's actually not true. The United States has always, it's only been maybe certain periods of time we've been more unified. We've always been a very precarious balance. Like they barely even got the states to come together in the first place.
Yeah.
And same thing with like, World War II. I know there's global warfare happening right now, but the World War II is really happening full on while Uranus was in Taurus last time. And so there's also sort of like what's actually, I know there's all these things are potentials. Certainly in the United States with a civil war, that repetition of Uranus and Gemini, Neptune and Aries, maybe it's a lot of like states taking back a lot of their own power in relation to the federal government. I don't know if a whole, that's not something I want to talk about or project forward thinking.
Yeah.
But you'll
Well,
see people in astrology talking about this, is all I'm saying. And I think it's just important to keep in mind things are not actually always the same. And we see patterns with cycles and what shows up, but they don't actually always replicate exactly the same way. So we do have to keep that in mind. And the thing is, in spite of whatever does happen in the world, these are very empowering transits on personal levels for really dynamic change and really focusing in on what's going to make you most happy and excited and creatively fulfilled, and making that happen. These are really great transits for that are coming in.
yeah. I think when you're talking about the Uranus and Gemini aspect and where he'd go for the US, like one of the first things that kind of comes to mind is thinking about some of the things that are proposed with trade and how we form relationships with, and alliances with countries outside of us to trade goods and commodities. When you think about Mercury being the ruler of Gemini, and Mercury being essentially the transactionary planet that it is, I feel like there can be, especially since some of the narrative that's going into this year is how, especially here in the United States, is like, oh, we're going to put a tariff here, we're going to do this, and it's
Hmm.
easy to say, oh, we're going to add this to this, and we're going to make it more expensive here. But when you start to get into negotiations and the talking about
Right.
that, and into the actual, like, you try to maneuver yourself in this way to get this what you want, but then Mercury has these other like there's still a wild card around that. But I think I don't want to say like trade wars because I mean it's a big deal. We're a whole um I mean the planet relies on each other. We are countries that are built in, our economics are built in to the other countries in the world. That's where we're at. So to try to wall certain things off or to add extra money here or to like try to put things or have more things made in our country where obviously we have outsourced all that. It's just, it's not like that's a very idealized situation. I think there can be some Uranian moments that might come up, uh, especially at the start of this transit of like what that could look like.
Yeah, and with Uranus and Gemini, coming in, it's a radically different environment than Taurus. A lot of people
Yes.
watching this probably remember well the Uranus and Aries years, and so the Uranus and Aries years did have that Aries quality that we're already talking about with Neptune coming in there now. But when Uranus was in Aries, it was also squaring Pluto, and there was a lot of this Pluto-Uranus tension. This is really interesting because it's Uranus coming into Gemini in a trine with
Yeah.
Pluto and Aquarius right away, and that is something that none of those past periods of United States history with Uranus and Gemini had. And so I don't, that doesn't a trine doesn't solve everything, but it makes this really creative and all the I mean, that's one of the things where I really wonder what's going to happen because Uranus and Gemini has consistently shown up with big changes in inventions and technology. I mean, just some things like the telescope and um, lots of communication. There's just been
I have
lots.
some
Oh, you have
lists.
some?
I
Yeah,
have
go
some
for it.
lists,
Go
Gray, if you
for it.
want to.
Great,
I'm just gonna
great.
rattle them off and see what
Yeah,
you
go for
think.
it. Go for it. Awesome.
So our last Uranus and Gemini transit was about 1941 to
Yeah.
1948. That was actually the first electric computer. The ENIAC, ENIAC was built, which is an interesting chart, March 11th, 1945, if you want to look that up. So this is our first like legit computer that shows up. We get a microwave oven. I mean, that changed the whole way of like eating.
Yeah.
We got our first images of Earth from space. This is the first time we saw ourselves. Like, that's
Wow. That that
interesting.
is that is really cool.
The sound barrier was broken in
Mm,
the air for
right.
the first time. Um,
That's a
we,
really big one because
yeah,
there's going to be I mean, air, we already see this. There's so much going on with that right now yeah,
yeah. What's the
that's a really
next
big
thing
one.
we can kind of
Hmm.
glass, that we can break through in that sense? We get something like the Polaroid instant camera. I mean, it might not sound like
Mm,
much, but think about our phones today, where we just take a picture of someone and there it is, and that was the first
mm,
time you could just click a button and then all of a sudden you have this thing in your hand and you're able just to take pictures
mm,
quickly. That was when the Big Bang Theory was
mm.
theorized, which is definitely interesting.
And just to
Yeah,
throw a
go ahead.
couple other one, not just not total. It's not keep going with your list in a second, but like Saturn, Neptune, 1917 was like Einstein taking the theory of relativity like to the whole universe. And when we're
Mm,
talking about some of these, I know you're going to list some more in a second, but like Saturn, Neptune also will come in like the proposal for the World Wide Web and the first internet commercial providers and dial-ups getting started up was the last Saturn, Neptune. So
interesting.
that also comes in often really reshaping a lot of this thing. So when you're listing off all these Uranus and Gemini things, we can imagine because it is intersecting with
Hmm.
Saturn, Neptune at the same time, this is going to be kind of an off the charts time for these
It's
kinds of inventions. Yeah.
it's sort of unimaginable. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like we want to be like, oh, we can imagine anything, but no, maybe you can't. Like, we honestly don't know. Yeah. I thought, okay, the first Dead Sea Scrolls were found.
Yeah. That's a really
um,
fascinating
which was
one.
big. Scrolls, we're thinking about Mercury and
And that's
there's
very like Neptune and Aries to me, also, to be honest. I don't know. It might be interesting what sort of spiritual movements emerge with
yeah.
that too. Yeah. But yeah, keep going.
And I mean, this might not sound like a big one, but when you think about it, because that's when we think about inventions, we got to think about like what was invented so long ago to us is like, yeah, whatever. But in the time, it's big because it sets up a whole new precedent. And so something like this is when ballpoint pens
Mm,
got on the market and took
love
us from
that.
like fountain pens, essentially. I mean, this is
Hmm.
like a game changer. I mean, when you talk about scribe and writing and stuff. So
Yeah, and
that's
that's gonna be
some,
so big. I
yeah.
mean, Uranus and Gemini now, just we that's where you're saying we can't even we can imagine, but
Imagine.
things are gonna happen that combined with a Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, it's really gonna be some things that really would be mind blowing, most likely
Yeah.
that come in. Yeah.
So if we take it back a little further to the 1858 to 1866, uh, I mean, this is a huge one, is the first transatlantic telegraph cable between
Yeah.
North America and Europe. And what's so fascinating about that is they did the first cable, got the first operations in 1958 when Uranus moved in. And it wasn't until, and then it basically failed after 3 weeks. And it wasn't until 19 or 1866 at the end of the transit when the Great Eastern Ship, which was a huge ship that was actually built to transport people back and forth from Europe to America, which was a big deal too. It laid the final telegraph cable in the last year of the transit. So I was like, huh,
And I
that's
think was that even like
timing.
underwater or something? Or
I mean,
I'm not.
I don't know, but
But anyway, that I was gonna say
maybe.
that period is like the Neptune and Aries also. So that's one of the that's that time you're talking about there where they really get that laid down and the telegraph is going and that kind of, I mean, we have to
Yeah, that's
remember
right.
that was a massive change in communication. Now that is the Earth era, but that is like things are being sent somehow through the air. We're just so far beyond. I think actually I'd seen another one you didn't mention, at least I hope this is accurate. I saw something about like vinyl records with Uranus and Gemini also. Is that right? Did
Yes.
you see that?
Well, yeah, it's on the list. It's actually the invention of the phonograph, which was the
Oh,
first
okay.
device to be able to record sound. And so the whole sound thing is
Was that the
interesting.
earlier one in the 18?
This is in the 1858 through 1866. And I'm noticing like through some of the things with Uranus and Gemini, there seems to be these sound qualities. You think about the sound barrier, you think about like first being able to like actual record. Um, and because if you think about recording, whether it's the Polaroid camera or the recording of a voice for the first time, it's it's essentially a record of something. It's a timekeeper. It's its own scroll of sorts to like document what is at any particular amount of time, which feels very mercurial in my mind, like to be able to take
Yeah.
down
So
something.
totally. The thing is, I wanted to make sure. Yeah, it was. I looked it up while you were just talking. It was the vinyl LP came out in the next one, so in like 1948. And so there's a connection there where we see that sometime for there's one thing there and then next thing there. And again, music, things going through the sound and sound waves being in the air and I mean whatever's going to be coming up. But we see that with Uranus and Gemini, and then combining that in. That's an interesting one though, that combination with the phonograph you're saying, because again, that would I think that's probably there's a good chance that might have also been Neptune and Aries. I don't know if it was the right. Could have been Neptune
Based
and
on
Pisces,
the
so
based
it
on
might have
my
been Neptune and
list.
Pisces.
Based on
Because
the chronological list that I have going on, I think it could be
yeah,
Neptune and Aries.
doesn't matter. It's still Neptune and
Yeah.
Pisces is right. We have Neptune and Pisces now, so yeah, it's there's a connection. Yeah.
And I mean, we'll take the mercurial theme home even further. You know, we got the Pony Express that was going on
Wow, yeah.
during this time to get messages over to California. Also, the first section of the London Underground was built,
Mm,
which is, you know, the whole underground system that gets people around London. Uh, so that was big. Also, to go into when we were talking about actually ancestry before and some of the things you were bringing up, this is the time when Gregor Mendel formulated his laws of inheritance, which is essentially his
right.
ideas would become what we consider classic genetics.
One of the first genetic modifications is Saturn Neptune. So
So interesting.
that's one of the Saturn Neptune things that comes in that I looked at before with like how things will start changing. Yeah,
Hmm.
so obviously there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, it's like how do we take these ideas and these breakthroughs of thought and understanding, and then how do we manipulate them into our reality
Hmm.
is the question. Yeah, there's all types of things. If we take it back 1774 to 1782, uh, it's actually the first Illuminati that was founded, which I thought was interesting. The whole secret society and
Oh,
sharing
really?
information during the Enlightenment era was interesting. Um, yeah. I also noticed that during some of these periods too, at different points in time between like the previous one, the 1800s with the Emancipation Proclamation. At the same time, Russia also
Right.
abolished serfdom, and then the period before that,
Mm,
the Austria abolished serfdom. So it's interesting this dynamic, and I'm sure that of course there's other things going on than just Uranus
hmm
and Gemini, but to think about these declarations of freedom for people or like changing the dynamic to which people are enslaved under essentially was
hmm
interesting.
And that
Um,
is one of the
yeah.
things in general that I'm curious about is what happens with movements of people and the economic inequities going on. That's a big factor that you throw Uranus into Gemini with Pluto in Aquarius and Saturn, Neptune in Aries. Something could really, there could be
Yeah.
some real movement there with revolutions or just big changes with movements of people
Yes, which I'd
really
definitely like to see.
demanding change in a way that hasn't happened before anytime recently on
Yeah.
bigger scales of yeah.
And then, I mean, some themes I won't be like exact about what ones, but there's definitely a handful of incidences that created universities and colleges that are still here to this day, hundreds of years
Mm,
later, that are very prominent. So when we think about the educational field and what's created during this time,
mm,
especially in our technologically advancing understanding of how to disseminate information, it'll be interesting to see what is created.
mm,
Uh, and really, the last one I'll share is just way back in 1439 through 1447. Leonardo Bruni defines the Middle Ages and the modern time. So, this is actually the earliest person to write about viewing history from a three-point period view of
okay.
antiquity, Middle Ages, and modern. And he was at the cusp of like the Middle Ages to the modern period. So he's actually the person that defined the difference between that switch. And what's interesting about that switch is that essentially timeline wise, that switch happened in the last air age, the idea of moving from the Middle Ages to the modern age. So just thinking about this kind of conceptual idea of like humanity and the periods that we live, and especially since we've been in a long one since we've deemed modern, it makes me wonder if there will be a new definition as to the age that, or the time that we're living in and going in, and maybe we're postmoderning ourselves, and who knows what it could be called.
Yeah. I also saw in that time that's definitely really interesting. I think that it didn't that just like Gutenberg was working on the printing press in that period of time and later it's not a Uranus and Gemini but that Saturn, not Saturn, Pluto and Aquarius, Neptune and Aries period that comes in with like Henry VIII, and that's after like Martin Luther and the printing press is involved in that with like that whole big change coming in there. And then there's also like Bibles being translated for the people in that time period, which is very like Neptune and Aries.
Yeah, the King
And
James Bible was the first to be
mm,
printed in the 15 or no, sorry, the 1606 to 1613 zone.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yep. And that period, yeah. And so and that's the one where I mentioned like the telescopes before. And so the Neptune and Aries with Pluto and Aquarius had gone with the Copernicus revolution, but in that Uranus and Gemini period with a telescope, there's like Galileo and there's like Kepler publishing all of their work. And so there's really this like scientific revolution really kicking in. And then the later Uranus and Gemini, which you'd already went over, there's like a 1690, 1697 one, which is we're really into the Age of Enlightenment then. And then there's a Neptune and Aries that comes right after that in the early 1700s. And that was the last Saturn Neptune conjunction. So why I'm bringing that up in Aries was in that early 1700s period. They didn't have Uranus and Gemini, but Uranus and Gemini had just happened. They'd had that Uranus and Gemini transit at like during the 1690s, and then early 1700s we get Saturn, Neptune, and Aries. That's really pushing that Age of Enlightenment even further. But there's something about that sort of that intellectual, rational, these new theories of God, like and having this. That's one of the things even I'm wondering about what could happen with whether it's through quantum theories or I know there's like that God particle, or there's all these potential things coming in with just conceptions of it's just interesting. These are really huge
yeah.
movements. Like with the Neptune and Aries and that early 1700 period, people were publishing stuff about really using like rationalism to um, have this like sense of God.
Mm.
In this other, in that Age of Enlightenment, being so like human being centric, and we're gonna go out and really create what we want in the world and throw off the shackles. Although there's obviously like all this colonialism going on at the same time, and that's also obviously, well known for starting to break us out of some of the living in this ensouled universe with like astrology and all that kind of break is happening then too. But the combination is can really break with past thought that Neptune, Aries, Uranus, and Gemini. And was there more with the inventions with Uranus and Gemini? Because I thought we could maybe otherwise talk about just the basic meaning of it.
Yeah, no, the only thing in relation to actually what you were just talking
Okay,
about,
cool. Yeah.
one other thing or published Immanuel Kant
Oh,
published
right.
his first critique on the critique of
Yeah.
pure reason, which is essentially him seeking to determine the limits and the scope of metaphysics. And
Yeah.
so,
That's a
that
great
it
one.
really is leaning into what you were just talking about
And
there.
that one is really interesting because it happened around the time that Uranus was discovered. So Uranus was discovered
Yeah.
in Gemini, and I've looked at that before with Uranus. I've always thought that was really fascinating that that particular text came out with Uranus and Gemini, but also like right when we're kind of discovering it, and he's looking at how do yeah how do we
Yeah,
how do we
interesting.
even know what anything is and his extent so I
Well, let's
mean
give a
yeah.
few minutes to Uranus and Gemini as far as like beyond just history scope. But
Yeah.
let's
So
give
it's
a little second to
airs.
Jupiter
Yeah.
in
Okay.
Cancer too. I want to do
Okay.
that.
Cool.
So
Cool.
go
What do you
ahead.
want to do? Let's
Oh
do
no,
finish
can
rounds in
yeah,
Gemini.
let's
Yeah.
finish. We
Yeah.
don't want
Yeah.
to
So we've
mutable
talked
jumping
already some
around.
about the air element
Yeah.
but again, moving from an Earth and Taurus, which is so much more bringing Uranus into all these very tangible monetary systems and food production disruptions and all sorts. It's in this very slow, earthy move, but also the way Uranus can shake up Taurus, it's really created some really long term changes and shifts. Gemini is an air sign, and probably, I mean, honestly, among the air signs, it's even the most flexible and
Ooh.
volatile,
Yeah.
and it's mutable. It's like things all happening at once. I've been noticing, I just saw an article someone shared about doppelgangers being this huge cultural phenomenon,
Mm.
and I think that's actually very fascinating with Uranus and Gemini. It's certainly something. Naomi Klein wrote a book that she won an award for earlier this year about the doppelganger and this and relate to AI, and another author that people mistake her for. But with all the replications and all the like different people's identities on the internet, and Gemini is the twin. And if there's not so these like different sides of ourselves, the doppelganger is obviously a much more ancient idea, and there are older ideas of this being very much connected to soul and spirit sides of things. But and also has manifestations in a lot of horror stories of like that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde
Hide,
doppelganger
yeah.
side. Yeah. But that is the two thing, right? These different parts, and we definitely, no matter what, being a double-bodied sign and the images of twins, it's always like multiplicity of things. And it's not only is it a multiplicity of things being a mutable sign, it's a Mercury sign. So it's bridging all realms, going anywhere, and making all these connections. And it's Uranus. So, it's extreme exploration of things. And the thing is that this is also one of the reasons is especially powerful is it is the north node of
Mm.
Uranus. I don't remember, I should have looked it up ahead of time, but I don't remember when that shift happened because they do very slowly change over time. But the north node's been Uranus for a very long time. I mean, the north node's been in Gemini for Uranus for a very long time, all these periods that we've been talking about. And that Saturn Pluto conjunction in 2020 was so powerful because that was happening on their own south nodes. The Uranus North Node is not till like the middle of Gemini, so that's not happening anytime soon. But it is coming into its sign where it has its own North Node, and I think that's a big factor in how um, just powerful Uranus is in Gemini. And like you're saying, it's just extreme invention, movement, change. Yeah.
Yeah,
Bridging ideas, synthesizing ideas, point counterpoint, all, and it's so volatile, it's so frenetic that mix into we're throwing that into this mix of things. That's the part where it's just it's really going to create a big change.
mm. Yeah, God, those are all such the doppelganger thing is
Oh yeah, yeah,
fascinating to me. You
yeah.
know, and as you were speaking about like you reminded me of actually an email that I had read from my friend Evelyn Zool last night, which was very Uranus and the prospectively Uranus and Gemini to me. Because I mean, obviously Uranus and Gemini, we are going to have like I feel like we're going to have like Mercury retrogrades on steroids because there's going to be this Uranian component that shines through when we have Mercury doing its backward dance. But anyways, Evelyn had written about something that she had there's this guy, what's his name? Cliff High. And Cliff High, he is a creator of this like web crawler bot. And he's been doing this for quite some time. He actually is known to have predicted 9/11 through the crawler bot because the whole idea is it's like this bot is just crawling through the entirety of the internet and it's taking what everybody's saying, what kind of pre-AI and like bringing it all
Yeah.
together to create this this prediction or this potential reality. And he had come up again because there was this idea that the crawler bot thought that we were going to have like an alien invasion day recently, and of course we were not invaded by aliens. But what she was talking about that had me thinking was this idea of, this kind of chicken or the egg story where it's like, okay, the crawler bot is feeding us all these things and then being like, this can happen based on what's being talked about and what we're understanding and saying as people. But do we experience what we experience because we are talking about it, right? So it's this idea from like a mental and
Oh,
like
right.
magician
Hmm.
standpoint, where if we're all thinking and talking and typing, about this, our idea of what reality could be, is reality then that from a mental standpoint? You know what I'm saying? Like, and I found
Hmm.
that fascinating.
Absolutely. And that's why when we bring up some of these potential dark, difficult, violent, even, scenarios that we've seen in other eras, it's not to be like suggesting that that's what you want to put in your mind
Yeah.
to create. And I think the more everybody can be in the moment and embrace the moment and embrace where you are and what you want to do and focus on, it can also be quite powerful because there's going to be so much movement.
Yeah. Where's
Yeah.
your mind at?
Hmm.
And do you want it to be there? Is that the reality you want it to live? Like I always love coming back to the Aries perspective of the power of the individual. We all have our mind. Our mind can go like where, like let's have this yeah, let's get inspired to think in a different way. And if we're all doing that, like imagine what can be created by that, yeah, that just that rush of new um God, it's like a rush. The way I look at it in my mind is like a rush of new code. Like our mind is like the zeros and the ones, and we're like, as we think, it's like reality is being coded. And so imagine if we're all just thinking in this different way that is empowering and create a better world. Very utopian of me to say, but think about like the
Yeah.
code that could be written
Well, a lot
with
of us have
that.
gotten jaded over that possibility of happening, but
Yeah,
this
I
is a
know.
period of time where the more you can really put into creating the life you want to be living and inspiring other people to do the same, there's more traction there because things are gonna fall apart. Things are gonna fall apart in the world. And with Saturn Neptune, there's going to be disillusionment. There's going to be the ending of certain dreams, but then something else will come in, and that's what to really focus on. And I guess that could be a bridge to the Jupiter and Cancer side because
Yeah.
Jupiter, we do have an exalted Jupiter coming in, and so Jupiter is that force of life, fertility, and growth is one of those signatures of the star of Zeus. And being exalted, there is some real hope there, and you know, it is complicated, of course, because while Jupiter is in Cancer, it's got the square going on with Saturn and Aries, and so there's a really fascinating thing of like Jupiter exalted, Saturn in its fall.
Mhm.
And there's different scenario I mentioned before. We that combination could go with people, taking down systems that kind of do more mass transfer of wealth to the people that already have money in this like Jupiter and Cancer way that way. But we could also see other things, that's not the only thing. And if things like that are happening, it could be what kind of sparks some of the big movements of people, wanting to create a lot of change and take their power back as much as they're able to. Um, but Jupiter in Cancer, I mean, it's going to be a big factor because right now, as we're talking, we're heading into this Mars retrograde with Mars being retrograde mostly in Cancer, creating a lot of volatility and disruption, but also great potential for change, really dramatic change in that Cancer part. And so when Jupiter later comes in this cardinal sign combined with Saturn, Aries, and Neptune, there's a lot of potential there for like movement and change again. And Jupiter in Cancer really gives that ability to have it be something quite positive.
Yeah.
holding the tension with Saturn at the same time. It's not just like doing whatever you want. You're going to have to be fitting into the circumstances and everything for sure.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing about like where we're leaving off with this forecast and starting in is will have just crossed over the final Jupiter Saturn square. So it's like a signature
Yeah,
built
it's
in.
it's
Yeah.
basically marking that's the Jupiter in Cancer in square to Saturn Aries, a final of the three Jupiter Saturn squares takes us into this second half of the year, and that's really how it's being defined, really opening up that is that square and them being at this critical phase of their cycle, and how are we fitting in personally to these much larger changes going on in the world. And I mean, by the end of the year, what's so interesting though is we'll talk about Saturn and Neptune will go back into Pisces. Saturn before Neptune, we'll get a longer stretch of Saturn in Pisces than we get with Neptune in Pisces. But later in the year, Jupiter and Cancer is much farther along. They don't form an exact trine, but they get really close. And so we get these water trines coming in. And so that phase, as we'll talk about, I think that'll be Jupiter and Cancer really helping us adjust to whatever goes down for us with Saturn and Neptune first in Aries, and then that kind of going back to Pisces, and we got to maybe redream things or let stuff back into the cauldron like we talked about last time, and maybe dissolving and reshaping. And with Jupiter and Cancer now in a trine, not exact, but it is a whole sign trine, and it gets very close. I think that will also be really helpful, and they'll be in Jupiter's sign, so it'll be Saturn in Jupiter's sign. Now Saturn will have an exalted Jupiter ruling it, trining it, rather than a
Yeah.
Jupiter in the opposite side of Gemini squaring it. Very different.
I think that's a really good point to bring up
Yeah,
because that is a game changer as far
yeah, it,
as
it
the
is.
the end of Pisces
Yep.
dynamic between Saturn and Neptune both is that we get this exalted Jupiter juice. But it's interesting to think about like I've started to think about exaltations differently after following some of Joy Usher's work and her
Mm.
fascination with what I guess is called Moonkai, but if you look at it in your software, it looks like it says Moonakara. Um, and it's this position when essentially a planet is ruled by a planet that is out of sect from that planet, and then that planet's ruled by a planet that is out of sect from that planet. So it creates this contention essentially. And
Mm.
after hearing her work on that, I was like, oh my God, because I have four planets in contention in my chart, and I was like, this is screaming my life. But one of the things that she brought up, and she had a wonderful image of like what contention looks like, where it's like this little kid and he's picking up this big thing of sand and he's gonna throw it out and he's putting everything he has in it, but the wind just hits and it just hits you right back in the face, right? It's this idea of like putting everything you got and then it kind of turns on you and you have a face full of sand. But what one of the things that she was pointing out is that's actually the case with a lot of exalted placements of where planets are exalted. And so Jupiter is one of those. Not entirely. It's not
Hmm.
in the moon kai the
But it's
entire
in the
time.
but it's in the
But
sign of the moon.
yeah, because it's in the sign of the moon. When the moon is going to be in places like Capricorn and Aquarius, and I think also maybe in Leo. Check me on that. There's going to be these exist because if you think about it, exaltation, it just lifts the planet up, but it doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily mean that it's always of like beneficence. It's just
No, it's not.
exaggerated. So
Yeah,
I guess what I'm saying is like some of the things with Jupiter in Cancer make me think
it's
about,
very true.
the idea of like, especially coming to the United States, having a Jupiter return and this
Hmm.
idea of like protection of the country and nationalism and,
Hmm.
like this is a very real possibility or like the protection of people's families and their own life and like maybe my focus is more on like what's immediately around me and what I care about versus like outside issues or like bigger um
Yeah, it goes with a lot
yeah.
of the nationalist sort of counter movements to the you sort of referenced that before with trade and the more globalism kind of movements of like opening up trades and stuff. And now there's been a lot of like more national, more like you're like throwing in trade war
Yeah.
and like pulling things back. And I'm going to protect that. That does go with Jupiter and Cancer. Yeah.
Or like family values, family morals,
Hmm.
and some of these things coming up, even though like Jupiter
Yes.
is known for occasional hypocrisy of what that looks
But
like.
it can,
I tell
yeah.
you to
So,
do this, but
and that's why I brought up, that was when I was bringing up the thing about wealth transfers. I mean, that to
yeah.
me is one of the negative sides of the potential of an exalted Jupiter that might not be for the best for everybody. And so that's also true about, just to spend a little bit moment on Saturn and Aries too, because Saturn and Aries is in fall, and it's not true that that means just Saturn is weak and Saturn can't do anything in fall, but it's an extreme, and it's an extreme in the completely opposite direction from, this like inflated, it can, Jupiter and Cancer can be potentially inflated and can also get lots of attention and can really, but very positively can also kind of, like you're saying, elevating itself above things, like kind of rising above
Yeah.
things, where Saturn in Aries is falling. Saturn in Aries is getting pulled down, dragged down, and it is in the sign of Mars. So that's got the same thing that you were just referencing, where it's a day planet in the sign of a nocturnal planet, Mars.
Mm.
Um, and so you will see people that have Saturn in Aries, of course, in the natal charts that are highly successful, even in areas that you would normally think of that are connected to Saturn. So, um, but the fall standpoint does bring in, we could see that could go with authority figures that have a more, things are kind of falling apart, or they seem more corrupt or something like that. But fall can also be very countercultural
Mm.
and can be it's things that are not exalted. And
Yeah.
so I always think there's a real creative side that the fall placements often have. I think about them a lot too in terms of Exalted being more like helically rising and something really coming up into greater visibility, and falls being more like helical setting and going into like the darkness and the underworld, and they might have to, kind of take you through something.
Ooh, it makes
But
me think about underground movements and the things that we
I
don't
think
see
so.
coming with
I
Saturn
think
or Neptune.
I mean, underground movements would make so much sense
Yeah.
with everything going on. And if they're effective underground movements, they will be underground to some extent, but then they'll make an impact. So we'll have to see.
Yeah.
That
Until
that
they
that
need
would
to come
be,
out. Yeah.
yeah, and that makes perfect sense to me with the transits. That's one of the things I've always wondered about this time period, because that could actually
Mm.
be really significant.
Yeah.
Actually, things that make an impact, not things like we've seen this before and nothing ends up happening and it fizzles out. It's like it comes in and it actually has traction and changes things.
Yeah.
So it's a definite one of the potentials that you could imagine with a multivalent meeting of all these planets. Yeah.
Especially the idea too of like, which we'll go into when we're looking at the actual transits of like the station back into Pisces. Like, I mean, like we get the inspiration, we get the, like the impetus to initiate and start this, but then we like take it back under, and then we're in this space, like, and it makes me wonder, especially obviously when Jupiter gets into Leo and trines these placements, and of course it's going to have the opposition with Pluto, which is a whole that'll be another next time. But yeah, that's yeah, there's
So
a
I guess
lot
one
to
thing
take there.
so one thing just about Saturn Aries, what's challenging about, well, Saturn does actually like being in a fire sign.
Hmm.
Triplicity, what does it go with? It goes with support. It goes with having followers. It goes with having the group around you. So again, I think it works for movements and things. And when was the last time we had it? The end of the 90s, also the end of the 60s. Um, so those are times
Those are
of end of the
counterculture
60s.
movements.
Great, yeah, both times. Yep, huge counterculture movements, corrupt authorities, and also, definitely end of the 60s too, there were just heartbreaking assassinations at the same time and, riots breaking out of control and all sorts of things. But it's fast. It's Aries is also fast, right? I mean, that's one of the challenges with this for Saturn. 'Cause Saturn is more we think about being slow and thorough and pondering things, and you're putting it in like the fastest, Mars sign of Aries. So that's the weird
Yeah.
fall paradoxical quality of putting Saturn there. But again, this can go with if you're doing your work and focusing on things and building your community and so forth, this could be there's productive things that can be done. And I like it as part of the Neptune thing and that Uranus and Pluto thing happening at the same time that s- stuff it can be very powerful, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, it just makes me, yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of like the fall of order. And that can look
Yes.
like a bunch of different ways,
I
whether it's the
mean,
fall of like general orders or like if someone unfortunately
well,
is like
yeah.
taken down, then that whole order of whatever they were the figurehead of then has
Yeah.
its own like like so
And one
yeah.
thing about like for example, I mean Donald Trump, for example, already had assassination attempts. He and his not transits, but if you look at a lot of his timing techniques with like circumambulation to the bounds and this really dramatic, potentially powerful zodiacal releasing period he's come in though, it's
Mm.
Mars is just all over it. He has so much Mars stuff coming in. Which goes again sort of with like the Saturn and Aries. He is an interesting figure to come in during the Saturn and Aries Neptune time period. I mean, he's kind of honestly typecast for it,
Mm.
in many ways.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So, the one thing I want to say real quick about Jupiter in Cancer before maybe we like move it on, I'm thinking that we could probably get into our eclipses when we're actually in the charts
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. I think so.
give them time there. But in a recent podcast I did on Mars retrograde with Yolanda McAdam, we talked about. I mean, because right now we are in Mars, we're about to be in Mars retrograde as we are
Right.
positing this podcast. And that's a big theme that is starting out the beginning of the year is we have Mars just ripping through Cancer. And so the idea is that, there Mars can have its destructive quality. It can have its rearranging quality within the Cancer area of our charts. And it's also having its sun opposition there, right? So we're coming to a place of consciousness around the Cancer area of our chart. And so whatever happens with Mars, it feels like to me, I felt like it's very much of like sort of like preparing or burning the ground for where Jupiter will come. Because
Yes.
now I mean, Jupiter's about growth, it's about
Yep.
expansion. And so, whatever Mars might level in some way, or even Mars might incite, like
Mm-hmm.
it gets you really excited about something about that area of your chart. And then Jupiter gives the opportunity. So that's one of the things I really liked
Yeah.
about those two pairing together.
Oh, absolutely. The Mars retrograde coming in is it's actually got a lot of really interesting, complicated aspects to it. I actually made a YouTube video about it myself also. And I tried not to go into all that, the details of the complexity, but just talking about the fact that you use this time to really create change because I absolutely agree it's going to end up one level of that is the fact that much later here comes Jupiter and Cancer into the same area. So whatever you're innovating and changing in that part of your life, but also with regard to Saturn, Neptune, we got Jupiter and Cancer. Well, first of all, the fire element is getting stirred up in all of us. And while we're in this age of air, this fire element part with Aries is going to be really important. And so getting that relationship with fire. And then, of course, Mars retrograde in Cancer, like you're talking about, it's going to be trine Saturn, Neptune, and Pisces.
Yes.
And then it'll end up going back into Leo when Neptune's in Aries, and then it'll be a trine there.
Yeah.
So there is something very much to that with this Mars retrograde that I think it's really important for what plays out later this year. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, all that being said, we're a little over an hour in, so I think
Yeah,
it's a good time to get into the charts because we still have a lot to talk about. And I'm going to shoot for a 2.5 hour podcast max. Let's
great.
see if Gray and I can do it. Let's see if our mutable placements
I think
will
we can.
allow such a thing to happen. All right. Gray, can you see the chart okay?
Yep, I can.
All right, so we are in chart view now, and we are on the Cancer solstice, which is June 20th, 2025. We have the chart set for Washington, D.C. here, and good old and we left off with this chart, so you probably saw it if you watched the first program, but it was that glaring Pluto on the ascendant. But that's Sun Jupiter. Here we got Sun Jupiter. And so, Gray, initial thoughts of the Cancer solstice chart.
Well, one thing, like I had mentioned before, one of the reasons Neptune in Aries is going to be so significant is that you can see it right here. We have Sun, Jupiter forming a square to Saturn, Neptune, and all the ingress charts for not all of them, but once, especially once Neptune's in Aries for good, the, every single one is going to have this huge Neptune theme going on. And this one is, yeah, totally fascinating because it's the Saturn Jupiter square in effect, and then Neptune and the Sun are configured. So one thing about it when we were talking about the underworld and underworld movements and what's hidden and the unseen is that's what's going on here with Jupiter. I mean, we have an exalted Jupiter, but Jupiter is in the underworld. Jupiter is basically, if we think about the cycle as like a life cycle, Jupiter is dying here, like at the very end and about to be reborn. I actually have this in my chart, but it's in Pisces. And it's funny because you mentioned before, like, oh, Gray, you always like to talk about things that are liminal, and I have this sun applying to Jupiter and Pisces in my chart. And what's similar about that with this is that it is an exalted Jupiter, which does have that quality of being in its chariot because it's got some protection from the combustion. Although I just thought of my friend Kelly Surtees once said to me something about like well, that's only really like having an umbrella in the desert. But I think it is something, it's because it is exalted. There is, it's a strong Jupiter that's coming to the end of its cycle there, but it's not visible. Um, but for the sun, this is nice because the sun is coming into a conjunction with an exalted Jupiter. So that solar quality here is actually bona fide and has that bonification of this exalted Jupiter kind of lifting up something about the sun. So I think and then we have an exalted moon, as you have circled there, sextile that Sun Jupiter. And so they're on personal levels, I like this in terms of coming into relationship with this whole, I mean, this is going to be pretty early. This is still pretty early on. It's within a month, I think within a month of this, Saturn had come into Aries. It hasn't been that long since Jupiter's been into Cancer. So the solstice starts really powerful in terms of coming into this. There's also, of course, exalted means squaring Pluto, and this United States chart. It will be fascinating to see what ends up happening. There's obviously an extreme Pluto and Aquarius
Yeah.
theme coming in here, and there's also even a Uranian theme with Uranus on the IC.
That there is this chart is very interesting, especially just that moon's placement and its exalted position with the sun and Jupiter, but essentially is also moving to square that Pluto. It feels like a very complicated chart in some ways. I mean, complicated in the sense of like, what can I particularly make of this? Because there's so many. There's the stress of the Sun, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, but then there's like the somehow like the people and the like the reaction and the feelings about all this is aligning with what that Sun Jupiter looks like. And then it has the motivation of Mars too, because Mars and the moon
Yep,
are
Mars is
trining as
involved in
well.
the whole thing. Yep, Mars
Yeah, and
moon
then
trine,
Mars ruling
Mars
the midheaven,
sextile. Yep, and Mars
which
is
is the
sextile
people
the
in
sun.
power. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, this, I don't want to get into much mundane
Yeah.
predictions about this
Yeah.
particular chart, but it's a fascinating one in terms of if you're going to analyze this with mundane. I mean, it'll be interesting to look at this again to see what's going on with it. But everywhere in the world will have this chart. It just won't be, they won't have Pluto on the ascendant like that. So
Yeah.
there is this, everyone's got this like sextile between the Pluto and the Saturn Neptune. There's a lot of just interaction going on with all of this. And that moon, Mars trine, like you said, with Sun, Jupiter sextiling each on either side. Um, so I definitely like that in terms of I do wonder if I've been curious if like if there could be some though I will say I guess one mundane thing but the US is if some of this initial Saturn Neptune and Pluto and Aquarius combination does go with some either underground or idealistic or protest movements and that kind of
Hmm.
thing, it'll be interesting to see if there actually is something really building right here because I could see that being the case.
Yeah. It makes me think about too, like just another recent story that's all hot in the news right now about which is very Pluto and Aquarius in my mind, is that the CEO that was just gunned down, the healthcare CEO. Did you read about that? Um, it made me think of Pluto and Aquarius because of the whole dynamic of like essentially during like the French Revolution, the whole thing was like we're gonna
Yeah,
take down the
could
powerful
you
people.
say more about the details of that just so
Oh, yeah. So for people that don't know, there was oh gosh, I'm can't remember his name, but it was the CEO of United Healthcare or United Healthcare. Well, he was gunned down and killed recently. And the guy's on the manhunt right now. They're trying to find the guy. But I had read that there was like in the actual like bullet casings, there was like words saying like delay and denial. And so people are wondering, is this, someone who was affected by the healthcare system who is essentially denying people coverage or
mm,
like messing, which is a big issue. And we have a lot of healthcare issues here in the US, and that for-profit healthcare and like how many people get screwed because of that. And so I'm just looking at this kind of like sixth house signature and like third like and just what if there will be more about that because uh a
mm,
story like this, especially the guy who was killed, he has a Pisces moon, and sometimes people will have Pisces qualities that when they're
mm,
like a bigger figure that start like some sort of, uh, um, energy that moves beyond their particular story, or if they're, a sacrifice in some way to. Now, I'm sure the guy wasn't great. He already has things coming out about him that don't look too savory, but it just made me think if there will be more of a topic around care, and people or like things potentially trying to cut programs that are like that and money that is given to people, like
mm.
social security and things like
That is
that.
absolutely something that could happen. And I mean, I think the sun, what's difficult about the sun Jupiter is what I was saying about, Jupiter is still it's exalted, but it is combust and it's in the sixth house. So I feel like that could go a lot of ways. Like that could go with some issues around healthcare and economic and inequities and difficult things with the economy, perhaps, or
Labor,
labor movement. Yeah, but
movements, yeah,
maybe it also. I mean, I feel like that symbol could also speak to though. Yeah,
help
labor
there.
movements at the same time.
Yeah.
Movements if people are upset about things being cut or being even more unfair than they already are, or things being repealed, making things even worse than they already are. I mean, that could go with something. I feel like, yeah.
Yeah. Like not to say it'll be one way or the other, but maybe it could be a topic that will be.
Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of astrology where that's coming in the next couple years where they're really one of the potentialities is there's actual real movements and people are I mean, I know sometimes it's hard people can get easy to be jaded and everyone's just distracted on their phones and not really getting together. But if the stuff coming in is stuff that really could, in ways that I think, unless people in power are actually astrologers and look at astrology, they could be taken by surprise because it is the stuff that has the potential of something coming in and really changing stuff in pretty dramatic ways. My first, I mean, I mentioned the last podcast, my first teacher, Rosie Finn, always talked about this time in that way. I realize I have a little bit of like someone talking about this time from so back then in like 2007, 2008, being like, well, it's all going to go down, these corporate things are going to go down in the second, in this time period, like we were entering. She thought there could be real change happening with some of those things, and I do think it's possible, or things that people try to put through, and people really protesting back and fighting it. And I know that sometimes can get confusing, like who's on the right side and who's doing something wrong, and who's caught up in a conspiracy theory, and who's seeing this deeper part of reality, and vice, it's
Yeah.
Saturn, Neptune. It's going to be all confusing.
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be, I would be surprised if there's not more protests and resistance to certain things if people in higher positions of power, or like the invisible power players, try to do stuff. You know what I mean? Like, we'll just have to see. But
We'll have to wait and see.
yeah.
All right, Gray. Well, let us carry on into Cancer season here, because obviously we've already kind of illustrated at the beginning of Cancer season, we have the Sun making the square to Saturn and Neptune on the 22nd and 23rd, which is pretty much encapsulated in a lot of what we were talking about here.
Hmm.
But we are leading. Maybe I'll just push us to the new moon that happens on the 25th conjunct Jupiter. So we get a
Yeah.
Jupiterian new moon
And this
squaring
is
Saturn
right
Neptune.
after the, yeah, so this is interesting, the contrast, because it's still, Jupiter still combusts, Jupiter's still invisible in this liminal underworld phase, but Jupiter has been reanimated and regenerated. This is after the Jupiter Sun conjunction, and we get the new moon right away. So it's very powerful for this inner sense of Jupiterian vision and growth. And it's all separating from the Saturn Neptune. I mean, that's there and it's significant, but they are moving away from Saturn Neptune. And we talked about this last time, but this is also the period where simultaneously we do have Venus and Taurus.
Yeah.
And this is just one of the in a year of just, it will seem at times we're just going from one really frantic, hectic, over the top astrology configuration to another one. This section here to me just has a lot more traction. Um, a good time to really try to like put in some really productive growth for you, and maybe you need to recover or redevelop or whatever it is from all there's so much wild astrology that we talked about before, like in March and April, right? That this is a period where I think there can be a lot more steady growth coming in
Yeah.
my opinion.
I agree. It also too because I mean that new moon, like you said, the new moon is moving away from the Saturn Neptune signature. It's definitely present, but it's moving away as
Yeah.
far as like application wise. But it makes that close sextile with Mars and
Close sextile with
Virgo.
Mars and Virgo,
And
yeah.
then Venus, or excuse me, Mercury, who's ruling that Mars, is in a pretty close sextile with Uranus.
Mm-hmm.
At the,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of support in this chart. I think no matter what, maybe the bigger storylines that are you're processing or going through in your life, as far as like practical initiations from, maybe an intuitive place, what it is you care about, your emotional, what you want to protect, very Cancerian themes, what you're imagining. How do we Virgo that? How do we use some of these Earth planets? To slow down maybe some of the Saturn Neptune piece to be like, okay, how does this practically fit in? How can I maneuver? Um,
Yeah, it's a
I
beautiful
kind of
one. This
like
is
this.
one where,
Yeah.
yeah, it's right after the solstice. This is one of those real intention setting new moons for sure. when people talk about that, this one to me really is like a great one to really be setting intentions and doing that connecting inner with what you really want to bring in. And yeah.
Yeah. Wish upon a star, people. Wish upon a
Hmm.
star on June 25th. So let's continue forward here with, we get things like Mercury and Leo. Mercury crosses the barrier, makes a trine to Saturn, Neptune. So that,
Hmm. I
that,
mean, that's
yeah. And
all
then we
big
get
right here.
yeah,
And then
this
opposing Pluto,
Mercury.
that
Mhm.
Mercury, yep, exactly.
Yeah. So
Mercury really
June.
picks it up. This is one where we'll see this a bunch of different times where our planet, because they're all, especially once Uranus goes into Gemini. But what's about interesting about this one is because Uranus is at the end of Taurus, Mercury is leaving Taurus with the Uranus contact going right into the Saturn, Neptune, Pluto. So we'll see this again the second half of the year, especially with Mercury can just go through and connect all of them. So this will be important here.
Yeah, Mercury is our bridger planet, right?
Yeah.
So a little caveat, and it won't go back this far, I don't believe, but we are going to have a Mercury retrograde in Leo. So as Mercury, does its thing here, it's good to remember that we will be revisiting territory. Um,
The other thing
but
is that
oh, go
Neptune
ahead.
is stationing here. Now that we're not at the exact station
We're getting
retrograde, but
close.
we're within the week. And so as Neptune, I mean, as we get that new moon and as Mercury comes through here at the end of June, this is where we get Neptune stationing to go retrograde. Saturn is also slowing down, not quite stationing yet, but I think
Yeah,
there's something important to tune into here.
and so what
Yeah.
Gray's saying, there is really a dynamic period from July 4th
Hmm.
through July 12th. I mean, even
Hmm.
we could stretch it through July 17th because Mercury will station too. But essentially on July 4th, we have Venus making a conjunction with Uranus, who's at the tail end, right? I believe this
Yeah.
will be our last Venus-Uranus contact with Uranus in Venus's sign and getting a message from um, its
Mm.
instructor, I guess. And then basically Venus moves into Gemini. Neptune. So basically, Venus conjuncts Uranus, moves into Gemini, and Neptune stations retrograde all on the same day on
Yeah.
Independence Day here in the US.
Yes. This is another, yeah, this lunar cycle, like they're all gonna we're all gonna be, wow, this is a big time. But what again I like about this is there's a lot of coherence with the transits. It's not quite as volatile. It's big change at Neptune stationing. And then the other thing is, like you're saying, Uranus is just about to go into Gemini.
Oh, it's so close. Look at it.
So yeah,
July
just two
7th. There
days,
it
just 2 days
is.
later. So that Venus Uranus conjunction is so powerful. Did you say was it July 4th or 5th?
Yeah, it's the 4th. So
The 4th,
basically,
yeah.
yeah,
That's
same
really
day as
powerful because
Neptune.
it's right. She's sort of shepherding Uranus across that line, and
Yeah. She's
Venus
like,
and
"Here, let me ease your entry into Gemini. I'll whisper in your ear what it's like in here right before you move in."
yeah, and so we've already spoken about this significance at length earlier, but this is where it happens, where Neptune is intensified, and this is the first stationing of Neptune in Aries. It will be significant, and that's going on. Here comes Venus to contact Neptune, and here comes Uranus simultaneously making this very dramatic entrance into Gemini that has the exact sextile to, well, not exact, it's coming into contact with very close sextile with Saturn, Neptune, and close only 3 degrees away from a trine with Pluto. Like
Yeah.
that, this is that really amazing configuration that we're going to see play out the next couple years. That is really unusual, and it's sort of that wild card that
Mm.
topples all these scenarios people are saying they know is going to happen because we actually haven't seen this happen before.
Yeah.
And it's like what's gonna come in here, and so this this is this summer again, like the more you're really connected with what you want to be doing and working towards it, and it doesn't mean, you're just doing the best you can. Um, but if you're really wanting to go for something and try to really create something really dynamic, this is a really powerful period to me.
Yeah. It's intriguing. Like I am this is what gets me excited about astrology. I'm like, how are
Hmm.
these? Because this is all new. These are all fresh territory. It's not
Hmm.
even just the opportunity of the trines and the sextiles together. It's the opportunity at the beginning of something, in a
Yeah.
whole changeover that makes it even that more powerful because it's not,
Yeah.
we're halfway through the sign or it's at the end. It's like, no, we are in fresh territory and big things are flowing. What does that look like?
Yeah, I don't know if seeding is the best analogy, but it is an analogy, and that does work in a lot of ways. I do think there's going to be a lot of just things happening that's moving really fast, but it is planting seeds
Yeah,
in
it's true.
terms of this being the beginning of these longer things are going to play out. And of course, as we were saying, they're not staying in these signs. That's significant, except for Pluto. Pluto's the only one staying there. Uranus,
Cruising.
Saturn, Neptune are all going to go back to Taurus and Pisces and then come forward again. So we're only getting it's like this first movement, and some things may not stick. But if you're, it's really just embracing it and following your passion, like we keep saying, and being present with what's going on. And
And why I think this whole Mars retrograde business is so important because
hmm
this is what happens later. What are you
yeah,
doing? What are you doing with your energy when this happens? So that's something
yeah,
to think about here. So let's carry on because we do
yep.
have Saturn who's going to station on the
The
12th.
12th, right?
Yeah, so
So this is where they get only
so
13 arc
close.
minutes.
Yeah.
And this is because, right, remember Neptune's not moving and now Saturn's just creeping up, but not enough. Like it's because right before Saturn gets there, it stops. So I'm curious, like if I brought this up last time, but I've been wondering if there might be some storylines in the world, or it looks like something's going to happen, and does it not quite happen like we think it might because they don't actually. I think there is some kind of symbolic importance to the fact that even though this is
Mhm.
going to feel like a conjunction, it's not, and that actually happens next February in 2026. And so this is where there might be a lot of new ideas you're pursuing, that stuff could be forming here, but something's going to become a lot more kind of clicking into place later in 2026 when they actually do get together. But they get so close that it's just this really intensified Saturn Neptune quality, which again, it goes with big movements, it goes with revolutions, things being torn down, things being new things coming into form, senses of reality changing, collective sense of reality changing. We with the Uranus and Gemini, as we mentioned, we can in Pluto and Aquarius, we might be seeing more of those technological inventions starting to show up. But of course, this is all early, so
Yeah, let's
it's
we'll
it's
give
it's
it a
just
second.
dynamic. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It makes me think of like two scenarios. Either what's cooking here is, it cooks hot, but then it fizzles out,
Hmm.
or it's cooking, but it gets the delays of like everything that has to happen before that.
Yeah,
You get the
before
inspiration
it
or the
totally.
vision, and then
Yep.
it's like, oh, but I have all this Pisces Taurus stuff to clear up. Let's put that on ice until we can get that going.
Yeah, and of course the tricky thing, is that with while a lot of these things we can talk about how exciting this looks personally, so much will depend on where you are in the world also, because there will be probably some really volatile stuff happening in the world, and then
Yeah.
it's
We're
gonna
in
also
will
kind of
yeah.
depend on where you are and what's going on and how you're impacted by that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
we are in world leader zone. That's something to really take into account here when we're looking at the beginning of cardinal signs, especially Aries. So you bet there's going to be news stories about this leader is doing that, and then they're making
yeah,
news, but then they turn around, and then this is revealed, and then that, like I think it's going to be a lot of that.
Especially
Um,
with Donald Trump in the White House.
oh, I'm sure. I mean, that's already the case there. We don't need Saturn,
He's all
Neptune for
about that.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's yeah.
yeah. So, and well, then speaking of, right, a few days later, on the 17th of July, we have Mercury, he goes retrograde. So, when we talk about
Yeah.
also like sort of this reversal of where our head's at around things, that's a lot of retrogrades. That's a lot of change in
Hmm.
one period of time at the beginning of July through the middle. It's like, oh, what? We're in Gemini land now? Oh, what? Neptune, Saturn stations? Oh my goodness. I gotta think about this. Um,
Yeah. And so that's one of the main reasons too, just on top of what we were already saying, but another reason why this is, there's this burst there where we're getting all these ingresses and Neptune and Saturn stationing in Aries for the first time, and there's probably big dramatic events happening, but at the same time, when that's all happening, Mercury's going along pretty well, but by the time Saturn stations, Mercury's already really slowing down. And so what I think is really interesting about this retrograde is you can always still make progress on things with Mercury retrograde, but it does oftentimes, sometimes it does bring delays, and sometimes it also makes us really go within and rethink what we're doing and just look at things on a deeper level. And this particular Mercury retrograde that's going to be in Leo, again, a fire sign, connecting with that Saturn, Neptune in a fire sign, and the Mars. It's not here where Mars is retrograde, but again, even makes me think of the Leo part of your chart with the Mars retrograde we have right now
yeah.
as you and I are talking. Where the Leo part, Pluto's on the other side, opposite sign. There's something, again, you mentioned Uranus is in Gemini. This is the first time we'll have the Mercury retrograde with Uranus in Gemini. Venus is in Gemini
Yes.
here too. They're forming an exact sextile.
Well,
It
and I
seems like we're
think
really getting yeah, we're starting to adjust. This is a really important retrograde to like adjust, like we're trying to figure out what's going on and all the changes starting to show up.
yeah.
Yeah.
Especially from like, a Leo perspective and a solar perspective, right? We're
Hmm.
retrograding through solar territory. So these are could be, bigger questions of vitality and identity and, creative urges and, like all that. But what I find
Hmm.
very fascinating about this chart and this whole turnaround here and Mercury's involvement with it, and especially the retrogrades in Aries, is this Mars in Virgo conjunct the
Mm.
South Node for the first time in this zone, right? In this Pisces Virgo zone. So, there's
Yeah.
something to be said for Mercury kind of Mercury's moves affecting this Mars South Node business, affecting Uranus and Venus. And then obviously it's chained to this Saturn Neptune piece with
Yeah.
Mars on the South Node. So it feels, I don't want to say, fated in some way, but there's just something going on here that needs to be processed that is it has a kind of what we were talking about earlier about this idea of like these planets are not going to be here for long. They have unfinished business to attend to, and South Node can bring up things that need to be dealt with that are new territories to clear in, right? Because, eventually we're going to
Yes.
have the eclipses here.
There's definitely a purging, clearing thing here. Look, and this is why, it's funny now that we're talking through. I'm like, wow, that really didn't last long because when I was like, oh, this is like a nice little moment with that new moon. By the time I get here to July 18th, we're back into some very intense astrology, and now Mercury is retrograde. Venus is also at the northern bending, squaring the nodes with Mars at. She's coming into the square with Mars, which will
Yes.
be July
Yeah.
23rd. And then, like you're saying, Mars is on the south node and Mercury's retrograde. What Mercury retrograde is going to often bring up a time of purging and changing things, but it's always think about this more in terms of like that Mars problem solving Virgo quality and how can you might notice some things about yourself you just need to change and things are really changing in the world or you're realizing things about yourself that you want to be doing differently. And so it's this seems like it's as a moon, and it's, yeah, you're showing there too, the moon's waning with Venus. I mean, it's got this very waning moon kind of quality to me of like let's make some inner readjustments here. It's a little bit less of the like pushing for growth, by the time we get to the end of this cycle. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
still love that new moon at the beginning of this cycle, but it's definitely here
Hey,
we're going into this more inner kind of reorientation. Yeah.
well, I mean, something important to remember about that new moon and why it feels so juicy when we see Jupiter there in the context of Mars and that is that, I mean, we're talking still about earth and water. And so even though we have these juicy moments, there can still be internal restructuring that needs to happen.
Mm,
And the beauty of this, Venus Mars moment, right? This is definitely a hinge point in relational cycles, whether it's, personal, interpersonal, or, diplomatic relations, the idea of attraction versus individual desire. So there's
mhm,
tension there, but it all comes down to this mercurial aspect, which we're going into review anyways.
mhm.
So, there could be important conversations that need to come up that haven't, they've been on the back burner for a long time and they could be weighing us down and we need to like talk things through or we need to speak our piece or, you know, so it's even though it has tension around that, it's all comes down to the mind and communications and that kind of perception of our reality and how we can sink into new
Yeah.
understanding.
And those of you listening to this now, which is December of 2024, and we're about to have the Mars retrograde begin, and we're that's going to involve a week from now, around December 12th, Venus in Aquarius opposite Mars in
Yeah.
Leo. That whatever those Venus Mars relationships or issues you have in your life, but that does often Venus Mars does often involve relationships. Whatever these changes you need to be looking at now, this that's going to be important because this is another phase later on in their cycle, where we can see they come in here again in a powerful place. I think the we don't go back to it because it's fine the way we have it here, but I realized I think the critical point of this cycle is the full moon
I was
because
thinking that too.
yeah, the full moon is the same day that Saturn stations, and
Mm,
it's a full moon in Capricorn. And so, and then within a week of that, Mercury stations retrograde. So I think we have that nice new moon, but then we get to this full moon, and there's like start looking at, we kind of get taken into maybe we have some revelry of, oh, I have this dream and I want to do this, but there's something very sobering about this waning section
yeah,
of the lunar cycle
I
where
heard
I
that.
think we come in being more like, okay, well, if I want to do this, is this realistic or not? Or what do I need to change? What do I need to let go of here? Like you're saying with the Mars emptying part, or you know what I mean? Just kind of trying to problem solve what that is as we go through the Mercury retrograde then.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Right, the day after my birthday. So there's that, yeah, I feel like there's the pivot point because I mean that's what essentially
Yeah.
cardinal brings us. It brings us pivot points. And so I think you're absolutely right about that with that Saturn stationing. So
Hmm.
we can gosh, July is looking pretty juicy here as far as just like storylines and working through some big movements. All right,
Yeah.
let's carry on
You
here.
want to go to
So
the new moon or
yeah, so yeah, let's go to the new moon here. So we're in Leo season at this point. We've got a new moon on July 24th at 2 degrees, and look who is just
yeah.
perfectly in opposition. The planets, they love to do this to us. They're like, you know what? You ever heard about divine timing? Here we have that opposition with Pluto, but we also have
Yeah, the trine. Yep.
the trine to Saturn and Neptune. And then we also have sort of, it's close enough.
Yeah,
Uranus,
it's
it's
not
bringing
it's
in that configuration that you
it
were,
definitely does. It
yeah,
activates it. And
yeah,
this is of course right after, I mean, this is like the day after that Venus Mars square we were talking about. So it's the Venus Mars, the after effects, what's happening with the Venus Mars square is very alive at this new moon in addition. They're not
Yeah.
involved so much in the actual new moon by aspectus, but it's part of the background of this new moon. Yeah.
Yeah, and when we were talking about that Venus Mars business too, I couldn't help but like just thinking about where the sun was, because the sun is essentially ruling that Mercury who's retrograde
Hmm.
that is behind all of that, and it's inching up to the Pluto opposition. And whenever the sun or any planet is inching to a Pluto opposition, we feel the pressure of what that change or, purge or like that reconfiguration or that underworld journey that we're in starts to take place, and it brings us to this moment where we're actually confronted with it for a whole lunar cycle. And this is obviously very important, likening back. I feel it's very timely that we're doing this at the Mars retrograde cycle, because here once
Yeah.
again we're seeing an aspect that's built in with the Mars Pluto opposition that we're all going to experience at on January 2nd at these very degrees. And so here we get a new moon around it. So
Yeah, it's a really good point. That's definitely involved here. And yeah, there's definitely something here about adjusting to all the things going on, but hopefully because it is still got that Leo fire quality, there's real like action you can take and something you can do about it. But we're
yeah.
also definitely we're entering here that liminal Mercury psychopomp. Hermes is in the underworld heading towards the sun. There's definitely something deep with Mercury that we're going in here. So one thing about that, because the Mercury process here could still be like letting go of stuff, and but soon after this, there is that Mercury. Soon after this new moon, the new moon goes across Mercury retrograde, and then it's not too far after this. What is it? The very last day of July or close to that?
Yeah, so the end of July is an interesting period because we get a
Hmm.
couple things happening. We have Chiron who stations
Oh, right.
retrograde at that
Yeah.
time.
Hmm.
Venus moves into Cancer, so she's
Venus
now in
moves
the
into
Cancer
Cancer.
territory. But then we get the Mercury inferior cazimi on the 31st
Yeah.
of the month. Um,
Yeah. So because that new moon goes into it, and then we get that after this.
Oh, and Gray, I'm going to lump this in so you can talk about it too, is Venus moving to Cancer is important because she's forming the day after a square to Saturn, Neptune.
Right.
So, yeah, that's all going on.
Yeah, I mean that's really powerful. There's also, of course, the co-presence of Venus with Jupiter that's starting
Yeah.
here, which is really important because the astrology, this lunar cycle is potentially one. It's not as sort of off the charts cha chaotic necessarily as that March and April astrology we talked about before, but as we look at where Mars is here at the end of Virgo, once Mars goes into Libra, it's going to kick off a lot of stuff, opposing that Saturn Neptune. So this is like right before that, and because that new moon was configured to everything, Pluto, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, and then the Mercury retrogrades, roughly in range, but especially I think because of Venus coming in, like you're saying, and activating the Saturn Neptune, this Mercury retrograde, I think, is just very, very powerful
Yeah.
for adjusting to how things are changing. And you might get really some really powerful ideas here about what to do going forward that you can develop. So it's definitely a time to really pay attention to.
And it kind of reminds me actually of what we were sort of centering around in the previous episode, this idea of when we're amidst so much change, no matter how we might feel about it or label it good or bad or whatever, there is the creative impulse that comes with it. So how do we get
Hmm.
creative around how everything is shifting and moving at faster speeds, right? Because we do have all this fire and air emphasis.
Hmm.
And then Venus contacts that Neptune Saturn piece. And, she's, as you said, she's co-present with Jupiter, where they're both in this imaginal place of Cancer and that lunar territory. And there could be something about this particular time that might set us up for essentially what Mars's agenda is in Libra, right? Because then Mars will be ruled by Venus, who is getting sort of like she's having her Neptune Saturn tension and getting creative with it. And then she'll be able to instruct Mars with what she has learned or experienced or activated once Mars moves in and makes
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
tension
yeah,
on the 8th,
for
on
sure.
Lionsgate, 8-8,
Oh
if you
God, I
believe
didn't
in such
realize that.
things. I know,
Well,
right? Yeah.
hopefully, I love that you said she's getting creative with it because, yeah, this is also, this is one to realize, to keep in mind it will be a temporary transit, but there definitely could be some Venus types of disillusionment. Also, dreams kind of popped here as we
Yeah.
get I think this is the first time she'll come into a square with them since they've been in Aries. So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
something we're gonna have to get used to
Yeah.
is now Venus and Cancer every time is gonna come into square Saturn and Neptune and Aries. And so what's nice though is she gets away from that and she's heading towards
Look
Jupiter.
at
Now the
that.
rest of the astrology is very intense in this time period because as you're showing on August 7th, Mars comes in. So now we have this very dramatic configuration of Pluto, trine Uranus, they're both sextile Saturn and Neptune, and Mars is opposing them. And then off on the side, just doing their own thing outside this configuration is Venus and Jupiter. Oh, and there's also Mercury because Mercury's also, Mercury's a widely opposing. What date is Mercury station? August 11th, right? A few days
Yeah,
later. So
August
Mercury's
11th.
starting to,
Yeah.
yeah, Mercury doesn't get back to actually directly oppose Pluto, but Mercury is slowing down here and stationing so that this Mercury retrograde takes us right into this. Now, this is something where, one of those configurations where we could imagine some tense world events possibly coming in here. Um, but we don't know what's going to be happening, right? But
Yeah, we've got the
there's something to do with, I mean, if we think about depending on where you are and what you're working on here in August, this could be very there's a lot going on here. The Mars Saturn is hard. I mean, the one thing that does have going for it, at least, and this is something new we'll have to get used to, is the mutual reception they actually possess now when they oppose, because Mars is in the exaltation of Saturn and Saturn's in the home of Mars, but we consistently see that when the Mars Saturn cycle hits hard aspects, we tend to see difficult conflicts and world events going on, and often our personal lives can have some kind of test of adversity. It's just fascinating because it's coinciding with,
with yes, all the major
yeah,
transits. Well,
yeah.
and this is I feel like this is such an important moment too because we're talking about the potential of what Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto in this flow can create.
Hmm.
But here we have Mars coming in to activate all this, right?
Hmm.
And it's one thing to be imagining this and having that, like, well, what does it look like when you put it into action? Or what if it looks like when it's thrust upon you? It's
Hmm.
when there's movement, and that tension and sort of uh, that fence moment that is essentially the Mars Saturn cycle, because this is, Mars and Saturn, their cycle is how we work towards big things in life too. We're activated for what
Hmm.
the long-term plan is, and then we make to the opposition. And if what we've been putting a lot of effort into, it could pay off at this time. If we, Saturn can reward, but there can also be the need to pivot in some way or have certain delays, or there's just other worldly events that come in that we have no control over that then affect our moves. And
Yep.
so we see this, what is known as like a kite aspect, right? And so
Hmm.
usually the kite focal point is the tip, which happens to be this Saturn Neptune combination. And we know that this is our main storyline for 2025 and how what we're leading up to. So I think this is just a pivotal moment, no matter what is going on, to
Yeah,
longer themes that you're
and it's a
experiencing.
absolutely, and it's a waxing moon. This particular day is fascinating because the moon will go over Pluto, go over
Yeah,
Pluto, oppose Mercury retrograde. But then if you go forward one day, we're at the full moon.
it's full moon.
So we get this full moon coming in here in the sign of Saturn, with Mars basically involved in it. You know, Mars is like in between Saturn and Neptune here, still applying to Pluto, separating from Uranus, but it's all happening. And then, I mean, what's amazing though is that somehow there's this Venus within 3 degrees of Jupiter
Yeah,
simultaneously. So there's this really mixed, I mean,
mixed bag.
yeah, mixed bag. And so this is going to show up for people in really different ways depending on their chart and where you are in the world. Um, but this is definitely one of the moments of the year to be, where we can see stuff is very set off. What you said is really good about whatever has been building. If there's been some tensions or things starting to form, I mean, Mars is kicking something. Mars is something's coming through here. So just be aware of that. It's cardinal signs, so it could very well be very accelerating
Yeah.
events. Um, but keep in mind because it's cardinal, some of those events, if you don't like them, the good thing is maybe they don't last. Maybe it's not the end of the world. Maybe it's something that comes through that's tense and you have to deal with, and then it's kind of over.
Hard and
Um,
fast.
but yeah, because I'll be really curious with this one because then it's right after this, what, a couple of days later that
Mercury
Mercury stations
stations.
direct. So
Hmm.
when Mercury stations, Mars is basically still in it. It's just barely separating from Pluto. So, and that's when the Venus Jupiter goes exact. So,
Yeah, August 11th has three things going on.
hmm
Mercury stations direct.
hmm
Saturn is exactly sextile Uranus. That
Oh, right.
perfects.
That's
And we
huge.
have
Yeah.
Venus conjunct Jupiter all on the same day. Whoever's got August 11th birthday, if you're August 11th baby out there,
My
put a
daughter
chart.
does. So I'll be,
What?
yeah,
Oh, funny.
yeah,
Oh, what a year for her.
yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it will be a significant year for her too. Um, for sure.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, the Saturn, the Saturn Uranus um combination is actually a really big deal. I forgot that happened exactly on this day too. Because we can see these outer planets like Saturn, Uranus, and you may not think of sextiles like the biggest aspect in the world, but they kind of hover around the exact aspect for a while. But for that exact aspect to come in here while all this other stuff is going on, it just really heightens that there's going to be meaningful stuff happening. And again, it'll be wild. Just keep that in mind with whatever's going on here. Things may not turn out. It's a kind of thing that I think could definitely provoke fears, and we're going to have to watch the tendency with Saturn Neptune to get overly fearful. Obviously, being um, mindfully aware of real concerns and things that you need to pay attention to, but not letting our fear of paranoia of things run too wild with our imaginations. Because but so fascinating though is that the Jupiter Venus is really bringing it. That's a really nice conjunction in Cancer.
It
That
is.
that could
It's
really be lifting you out of whatever, or maybe you're dealing with something and then there's some way to do something to help out in this other part of your life. They may not even be necessarily in the same parts of your life, you know.
I know it feels like kind of two storylines going on,
Yeah.
and but the two storylines maybe can support each other in some way where,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe you're going through, we have a couple potentially rough days or like pivot days that ask a lot of us, but then there's the whole Venus Jupiter component where we have support. Maybe we have familial support, we have our partners supporting us, we have support of the community, or we just have emotional support on the inside that helps be like, you know what? No matter what's going on, I feel pretty buoyant about what could happen or, creative solutions to whatever's going on in my life. So it feels like a balm, like a healing balm that BALM that happens.
Yeah.
So let us carry on, Gray. We have so much to get through
Yeah.
here. My original goal, I don't know. I don't know if we're gonna be able to do it. So let's cruise on through.
Well, that was some of the we've covered some of the. I mean,
That was
there's a
like the
lot more to talk
meat.
about, but that was a big part right there to talk about. Yeah. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot more happening, but that was a big thing there to
So
focus on for a moment. Yeah.
I'm gonna fast forward us to Virgo season,
Yeah,
basically.
that's fine.
Because Virgo season sees our first Sun Uranus square on August
Mm.
24th. So we get a Sun Uranus moment that is of a different flavor, that is of a mercurial flavor after Mercury has gone retrograde. So Mercury is still, gaining in its shadow zone. Um, so this will be an interesting moment, and it happens to be enwrapped or wrapped up in a new moon that is square Uranus.
Yeah.
So
And this will be we'll have the Virgo part of your chart if he actually ends up having a really big impact here. You know, we definitely are talking about all the mutable signs and how important this year is going to be for the mutable signs with Uranus coming into Gemini and Saturn and Neptune going back and forth in Pisces. But this period, we actually have back to back new moon in Virgos, and the next new moon in Virgo is actually a solar eclipse. So we have
yeah.
this one at the first degree of Virgo, and then there's going to be a solar eclipse at the last degree of Virgo. So your Virgo part of your chart and however you relate to Virgo, it's a really big deal here with important developments happening. And yeah, you're right. It's fascinating. It's a first Uranus square, first new moon in Virgo, lunation in Virgo, forming a square to Uranus and Gemini.
I mean, I feel like Virgo season, just all in all, like because we start off with this and then we end with a solar eclipse, it's like, okay, we are, to bring up Gray's favorite word, liminal. We're in the, the liminal mutable zone of this changing space and experiencing these eclipses that are coming, that we're definitely gonna have to spend some time on here.
Yeah, and it
Virgo
also makes
season's a
me,
big
oh,
month. Go
sorry.
ahead. No, go
I was
ahead.
gonna say it also makes me think that with the Virgo people, I know a lot of Virgo people, oh, I'm so ready to be done with Neptune and Pisces, and you are here, but it's just funny, like, okay, well, welcome Uranus, because now Virgos just have to like they trade out they eventually trade out Neptune and Pisces opposing, but now they're gonna have Uranus and Gemini, which is honestly really interesting to think about Virgo and how that's going to be different. That now instead of Virgo opposite Neptune, it's going to be Virgo with Uranus. It's going to be these really activated Virgo. I mean, I'm actually excited to see it. Let's see what how Virgos get really activated to make a lot of Uranian changes.
It
And
makes,
so the other
yeah.
big thing is that if is right after this, then Neptune's at the end of Cancer here. And what is this? August 23rd. It's around August 25th or so, a couple days later, Venus comes into Leo. And so now we'll get, before we talked about the square from Venus to Saturn, Neptune, and now we'll get the trine from Venus at the beginning of Leo to Saturn, Neptune. And then she's going to sextile Uranus, and then she's going to oppose Pluto. So that'll all happen like in the first 3 days after this new moon.
So I will change the chart to that. Gray and I talk so long that it challenges my AirPods. So I'm just gonna change my headphones real quick.
Yeah, and the other thing
Um,
is,
and make
what's
sure
actually,
I can
mm,
hear uh Gray, can you talk for a second?
yeah, I was gonna say the other thing that's
Oh,
really
why don't I hear
amazing
you?
is,
Bear with us, people. I
oh, I
All
hope you
right,
can hear
I'm
me.
gonna do something else.
I don't see
You can
anything.
keep talking to him, Gray.
Okay, so the thing that happens right here, well, you can't see it on this chart, but on August 25th, Venus goes into Leo. And at the same time, Mercury is moving out of that retrograde shadow zone of where it's gone back and forth. So, whatever that Mercury retrograde cycle brought in for changes and things you want to do differently, we're really in a phase now of Mercury going fast. And Mercury is really going to be able to make changes with whatever that is. And this is like, again, a Virgo new moon. And then that Venus coming into Leo connects to Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto all just within a few days. That all happens by August 26th. And then at the same time, basically, we get an exact sextile between Neptune and Uranus on August 28th, which is again, it's significant that this sextile hits exactness, just like we mentioned earlier with Saturn and Uranus actually hitting an exact sextile that we get the exact one. So this lunar cycle, I mean, there's also again where the astrology this whole year just keeps changing into intense astrology, but I like, we've come out of that heavy Mars contact. Mars is now separating away from Saturn Neptune. Now it is coming into square Jupiter, but a Mars Jupiter square can actually be pretty if you're in a good place with your life, that can be pretty generative as far as like getting out there and going after things. So I like this opening here of this Virgo new moon being another one where we come out of a very intense astrology period, and hopefully there's a nice moment here to kind of regroup and make some forward adjustments and changes and that sort of thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks
cool.
thanks for taking the lead there. And I totally agree with what you're saying. I think what's so important about the new moon and it's squaring Uranus and like pushing us, to get out of our comfort zones and new territory. And it's essentially leading us to the eclipses. It's can be jarring in a sense, especially more from like a mercurial place, but it does push us to embody what like change can look like, and then we get the added the added bonus of the Neptune Uranus piece, but also that push of Mars Jupiter. So
Mm.
there's which, as you said, can be exaggerated or inflated in some way, and that's can be absolutely a potential thing, especially with Neptune and Uranus getting together. But it can also be those moments of leaps of faith because we're essentially attaching to a new idea or have this we're ramped up by sort of how we want to shake up our lives or invent new scenarios or surroundings. And we can do what it takes to initiate that because Jupiter and Mars both are in cardinal signs that can help get things off the ground in some way. And especially with that Virgo new moon, and we have two new moons and a solar eclipse in what is the shape-shifting part of our physical reality. Like that's sort of exciting. It can be a lot too, like a lot of moving
Yeah.
pieces, but things are going to look different. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and just because you have it, if you hold off just for a second on this chart, and something else just to add on, just something different than what you were just talking about. I like what you were just saying though, because you brought up before the idea of Jupiter exalted in Cancer in the sign of the moon, and something that I've noticed that's going to be interesting, that's going to be a change with that, is our experience of the moon in Scorpio. I mean, the moon is in fall in Scorpio, but recently, it wasn't too long ago, we were having Scorpio moons that were hitting the nodes and having eclipses, and all the Scorpio moons the past period of 8 years, 7 years or so have been opposing Uranus. This period, Uranus is in Gemini now, and the moon in Scorpio, especially this one, it's a waxing moon in Scorpio, and it's forming a trine to Jupiter, which does have reception. And so it's still going to be Scorpio moon in fall. It's intense. It's picking up all the feelings and emotions and everything going on. But it's going to be an interesting new experience of that Scorpio moon in this Jupiter and Cancer time period, where I'm actually pretty excited about that, for like kind of watery insight into things. And yeah.
Oh, I like it. I mean, as a Scorpio rising, I will take that.
Yeah.
And a Cancer, I'm like, yeah, I can get down with what you're saying. That sounds great. Um, Definitely more supportive there. All right. And I know why you said to hold off on this chart, because essentially the only a couple days later we have Saturn moving back into
Yeah.
Pisces on
Mm.
technically September 1st, even though our chart says the 2nd, but that's going to be, here we are, we're crossing the territory back in. And so I'm kind of going to pull a couple things together in the interest of saving time, and then we can just kind of get in there. So Saturn's back in Pisces September 1st. We got Mercury that moves into Virgo to help our whole Virgo situation out. We have Mercury squaring Uranus at that time too. We have, as Gray had pointed out earlier, Mars squaring Jupiter. And then on the 5th of September, we have Uranus, who stations retrograde. And then it brings us to the lunar eclipse on the 7th. So I just kind of wanted to pull all that in, and then we can kind of maybe
Yeah.
take it from there.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot. So on one hand, right before this, one thing that's important is that obviously Saturn goes back into Pisces and Mercury comes into Virgo. And so just to get that first Mercury in Virgo square to Uranus and Gemini, that's going to be something we're going to be end up being very used to, but this will be the first time of experiencing that. So that'll be very interesting. Uranus is in Gemini sign. Um,
Especially with it stationing too. So we get the
and
first hit of it, but
stationing.
it's
Yeah, that's a good
slow.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's slow, and I know people will talk negatively about planets stationing retrograde, but they're actually very powerful. And Uranus comes through really intensely, and there will be big Uranian. It definitely puts up the possibility of like Uranian insights and kind of sudden revelations, and with especially with that Mercury square to it. And then we pretty shortly go into this eclipse. So this eclipse comes less than a week after Saturn has come back to Pisces. Mercury is heading towards the sun and heading towards the south node of the moon that Mercury is the lord of. The eclipsed moon is heading towards Saturn, but there is an intercession or interceding of Exalted, Jupiter, and Cancer, the lord of the moon, the north node, Saturn, and the eclipse. So it's a lunar eclipse in Pisces applying to a trine with Jupiter exalted in Cancer, which is at least, this is to me not as, it's definitely a dramatic eclipse. It's going to go with big change. I'm not saying everything's going to be perfect and easy here, but it's not to me as chaotic of an eclipse as that one in Virgo.
Earlier in the year.
Earlier in the year, that Virgo lunar eclipse. And I think what's really interesting is it's such a dramatic entrance of Saturn back into Pisces. Um, And so we'll have another entrance of Neptune back into Pisces later, but this is another time where they get separated a little bit by sign. And so we still are dealing with the new Neptune in Aries, but now Saturn's come back. So if you're a Saturn Pisces person having a Saturn return, you'll have, a return of that. The Saturn return themes will get intensified again. And again, whatever kind of gets started with this Aries movement of Saturn in your relationship with, you come back to the Pisces story again, and there's something that is still getting worked out related to Pisces that you have to kind of come back to. And yeah, this is eclipse just really setting it off. So if you're a mutable person, if you have stuff in Pisces, this should be a pretty big marking some kind of important event for you, um, turning point kind of thing.
It makes me think about what you were talking about earlier, Gray, about the impact of our Pisces experience
Hmm.
now that Jupiter is in Cancer versus Gemini.
Hmm.
And so I think this is where I would like to think. I mean, obviously, there's the Mars Jupiter component in. So it's almost like kind of what Mars is doing up until this point, and that like pressure that Mars brings in will sort of inform, you know, to some extent, because we're talking about a cardinal square
Yeah.
that
Yeah, it's
then
only a degree
informs,
away. Yeah.
yeah, and then informs this mutable culmination. So
Hmm.
where do we have like a start, or where are we like pushing off or gaining some sort of momentum or would like to, but then there's this whole shifting quality that has to come in, whether it's literal in a physical space where, a job or home or whatever, finances or health, whatever has to kind of maneuver, but then also sort of like the spiritual component and the emotional component. I think it's very supportive. Like I feel like there's a whole push from Mars and Jupiter, just as long as there's not sort of that Piscean effect that we can be a little delusional around something or like add a little bit too much to it. I don't think that's necessarily will be the case. Everybody will be different. I feel like this is overall a supportive eclipse, if we can say such things. But the quality of Jupiter and Cancer versus the Jupiter and Gemini business, I think is big.
Yeah, I mean, it helps. I guess I mean any eclipse though with Saturn, I don't want to like
You're like rain on my
sugar.
parade.
Yeah, I just don't want to like be like sugarcoated too much. I mean, it's not necessary. I mean, it's gonna have that Saturn intensity, but
Because of
yeah.
the new moon, because of the solar eclipse. So
Yeah, because there's an
that's a
eclipse in
big part.
this, because Saturn's, yeah, they're not that far away.
Well,
But I
Saturn's
do
going to be
think,
opposing the solar eclipse. So
oh, right, right.
I think
Yeah.
I think that's what you're saying is like we are leading to a start that is very Saturnian or opposing
Yes.
Saturn.
But even the lunar eclipse just being in the same sign of Saturn and it's heading towards Saturn, it still makes it, but yes, that's the really crucial thing is that it's not just that Saturn's in the same sign as this eclipse. It's that we go into a solar eclipse after this that is in the final degree of Virgo opposite Saturn. However, you're right that, yes, that's why I was saying earlier too, that the trine to Jupiter and Cancer, even though Jupiter's have the square with Mars, so there's definitely there's a lot of volatility perhaps and tension and but change and this period is taking us back into um, work out whatever the Saturn, Neptune, I mean Saturn and Pisces stories are for you. Um, especially the next eclipse, it's essentially an eclipse opposite Saturn, Neptune.
I I think
So,
yeah, that's big. And so kind of this moment in time we're looking at the chart right
mhm,
now, I think one thing we should probably point out is our eclipse order is essentially a north node eclipse to a south
mhm.
node eclipse.
Oh yeah,
So
that's a good
we
point.
we get north node eclipse, with the lunar eclipse, And then only a couple days later, between September 10th through the 12th, well, essentially September 10th through the 13th, we get this Sun Mercury cazimi that's conjunct the South
Yeah.
Node. So we have a moment with the South Node before sort of that mercurial, almost like psychopomp moment with what that South Node story could look
Yeah, so
like.
I'll oftentimes with those, there is something we're having to let go of or release. So that Virgo part of your chart could have that emptying, letting go, release, sacrificing something that though is also making something sacred, or but that can sometimes with when the lunar eclipse is at the north node, that can feed into there is something new coming in or some kind of growth. But the fact that Mercury is then, like you're saying, in the underworld, heading into the sun on the south node, just really, to me, intensifies that quality of like letting go of something, burning something off, but something's also being definitely being seated. I mean, it always does with Mercury and its sextile net Jupiter, like you're showing there. Um,
You know, it's an interesting configuration because we got the sextile to Jupiter, but then we also have like this Venus Mars sextile going on at the same time. So there's like these interesting supports or opportunities within everything that's kind of happening and and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this is again because we have these eclipses that come in and are setting off the Saturn Neptune, and this part here is not as much on the Saturn Neptune, but it's we will be seeing it's all heading that way, and the new Mercury cycle coming in is opposing Saturn. Um, it's one of the reasons why I mean this year I just it's got to be just like it's hard to know what will happen. So I think again here is this is realizing again that this is just one of those transits that comes through. It's likely to bring some big change and there's some kind of important being I think really being present with whatever is going on. And I do think I really, again, I like the trine of Jupiter and Cancer to the eclipse at least. And I really like the sextile between Jupiter and the Sun, Mercury, like you showed, and the sextile between Venus and Mars. So I feel like there's definitely some positive things that could come out for like with insights into things. And
Well, I think it helps if we're going through major changes or getting through like in these really shifting zones that it helps to have these supports and these opportunities in other areas. It's
hmm
like, you know, if your whole life is shifting, say your whole life is shifting and you're moving to a new place, you're moving halfway
hmm
across the country, but in
hmm
order to move halfway across the country, you need a job somewhere else. And then all of a sudden
hmm
you're, you know, the person who maybe Venus rules your job sector and Mars is getting together and you just happen to know someone that links you up. So it feels like there's these, if we take action in sort of that sextile way where it's like there's opportunity, but you have to involve yourself or get, you know, community involvement. It's like no matter what big change is going on, there's these supportive arenas to help put those pieces together to where it's not complete tension per se, but you know, yeah, things are gelling
yeah,
because there's doors that
yeah.
open.
It occurs to me, I've even had a couple consultations recently of like people that have Jupiter Saturn configured in with their charts, with the cycle and the dynamics in their charts, and talking about potentially actually moving to other countries.
Mm.
Um, and things that could be playing out across even this time period. So I think there's a lot of people like that out there in the world right now with plans they want to do and changes they want to make. And I think the point here is just to realize there may be makes me think of like especially with Saturn coming back to Neptune. One thing I didn't speak to before that we could have is that Saturn being symbolically so excessively cold and dry, the excessively coldness, right? When it is in Aries, it's in its fall, but that fire is at least kind of warming. It gets Saturn moving, and this is Now Saturn's coming back to Pisces, which can have that longing and yearning, and can fall into disillusionment. And so if there might be some old dream or some old thing that does have to be let go of through this process here, but it may not be the case either, honestly. It could just be more like you're just kind of realizing, like, decluttering and letting go of some more minor. You're not like letting go of this huge dream you've had. Really may not be that dramatic, but on some level, there's some sort of like reconciling as first Saturn comes back to Pisces and then Neptune comes back to Pisces. How I'm sure there'll be volatile things in the world going on, if nothing else, that are like, we're just all having to deal with in disillusioning ways at times, because that's already going on right now.
Yeah.
It always is. But does that make, yeah, so there's just stuff like
Yeah.
that that you're just gonna have to come into relationship with here. But
Makes me also
um
think of like how can you activate the dream? Like maybe
yeah, how can
a
you
lot of
activate?
time,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like how many
Mm.
times do we live in a dream world and we're like, we're always
Hmm.
daydreaming about this particular thing, and we almost live in two spaces in this liminal space because half the
Mm.
time we're thinking about this thing that we're dreaming about, but nothing's happened around it yet. And so perhaps that's also part of it too, because obviously we probably are going to clear out some things or have old dreams or old parts of us or bubbles popped in a way and we're like, yeah, that's not going to work for where I'm going. But it could also be this very long overdue daydream that it's like, okay, well, how are we going to activate this in a way? Saturn, right? We think about the Saturn energy of the sun coming up, and Virgo's like, I want to solve a problem. I want to solve a Saturnian problem. And so, how are we going to do this? Because what's interesting about this whole part of like the end of Virgo season is essentially we have Venus move into Virgo. She's the next planet to square Uranus in
Yeah.
Gemini. And then we have the sun opposing Saturn the next day. Then we have the solar eclipse. And then we have Mars move into Scorpio. So there's all these
And
shifts
the
that are taking place.
Mercury air triangle with Pluto Uranus
Yes.
too
Yes.
simultaneously. Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
and then that solar eclipse that comes in,
Just gonna
I
take
really
us
like what you were
there.
just saying about that, because that's actually, I like that better than what I was saying, because you might have a letting go of a dream, but what it really is, this in this whole year, and while I've been trying to stress, like, go follow your passions, is this is really a time to like get rid of the daydream. If you don't, it's not a time to be, oh, I'm just doing this and not, I have this other dream that I'm just sort of just have in my mind, I'm not doing anything about. And um obviously we all have something like that in
Yeah.
one way or another, and that can actually be very inspiring for us. But there is something about coming to grips with the reality of what elements of your dream can you bring into reality. And I think these Virgo things are going to be like that sorting of Virgo, and what parts can come in, and you can really build and work towards in reality. Because like this solar eclipse here at the final degree of Virgo, which is obviously then right before the equinox, it's so close to the equinox, it's almost like falling into Libra.
I
But
know,
then,
right?
it's right in between Saturn, Neptune. This is gonna give us a lot of information about what's going on with these dreams, or what we want to be doing in our life, what's working, what's not working, what has to be let go of, what needs some adjustments. Um, and I definitely think, though, also, I'm not saying just be super hardcore, pragmatic, realistic. Um, in a way that you're not, that daydreaming function we have, and being in touch with the unconscious, and that ability we have to dream something else, I do think is also part of this, because it's also, this eclipse is opposing Neptune. um but there's something about just having to come into relationship with the reality of what's going on with whatever that is for you.
Yeah. And I think all the things that we said can all apply at the same time. It's like,
Yeah.
especially when we're in this place of like, oh yeah, maybe some dreams do need to end because I'm always like thinking about this or like, and it's just not plausible. It's just not feasible. And it takes up my time
Mm-hmm.
and energy, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
time and energy, as Saturn knows, is a finite thing. So when you only have so much fuel in your tank, it makes me think
Mm-hmm.
also with the whole Mars getting ready to square Pluto business, is it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I only got so much. So let's be practical here, but not practical in a way that kills anything. It's like what dream actually could work or and then how do I put my
Mm-hmm.
energy behind that and then leave the other pieces
Yeah.
behind. Like,
Yeah.
can't have it
Yeah.
all.
Because the big thing is with all these things popping into their sign, but they're all going to come back. It's like we might get pulled into like we get some new idea, we get some new thing we want to do, but then we have to kind of reconcile that with like what was our life already. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's a big part of all this.
Yeah, and to speak to that too is like I think the whole Venus squaring Uranus thing can also be very excitable because now all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
Venus is like, here we have all these Mercury energies getting excited, and Venus is like, oh, well, that sounds cool, or that like all of a sudden that pops into your awareness, or you read this and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, where's this going to take me? And so we can get so stimulated in a way that can be unexpected, maybe especially with Uranus and Gemini now. And so we have to sort of sort through that. And
Yeah.
yeah. So, because essentially this is trining Uranus too, like that, like you said, it's spilling over into
I mean, it
Libra.
is pretty much,
So
yeah.
there's a grand air trine situation going on too. It
I mean,
kind
right
of,
at, yeah, if you go to the equinox chart that happens
yeah,
basically
let's
right
move
after
on.
this, it's a very powerful equinox chart.
Or actually,
Again, I'm really curious what goes on with this because this Libra equinox chart is basically like right after an eclipse. And again, like I mentioned before, with
yeah,
how
here it is.
important Neptune is going to be in these ingress charts, this is our first, and it's not going to be the last of Libra ingress chart, Sun in Libra, opposite Neptune in Aries. And then, like you mentioned, the big thing is that Mars has gone into Scorpio and now is applying to square Pluto, which is on like a couple days later, September 24th. So yeah, this is a very dynamic Libra equinox chart that makes it look like this final section of the year. Is once again, like we keep saying, it's
I
a
know.
lot of changes coming in. It's this year just doesn't let up. And yeah, the amazing air triangle there, like you're showing too, with the sun,
Yeah.
Pluto, Uranus, and then it's another one of those kite things. This time it's Neptune that's in the exact kite, but Saturn's basically there. But yeah,
Yeah.
Neptune opposite the sun, Sun trine Uranus, Pluto. Yeah.
We're as high as a kite in 2025. We just keep coming into this kite formation,
But this one
basically.
is really again set off by Mars. I mean, that other one in August had Mars like setting it off by the opposition, but this one has Mars coming in on the side, squaring Pluto, which I think is really interesting. It's not really in a major aspect to anything else, unless you bring in some of the harmonic aspects, which you could, but that square from Mars to Pluto really makes me think of something that's really activating this. And we're all talking so much about this Mars Pluto opposition that's going on right now.
Exactly.
This is another part of the cycle here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what that is a key point. There's something to be said about like all the Mars retrograde and the pressurized experience with the opposition to Pluto. And this is
Mm-hmm.
the closing hinge of that cycle. And
Mm-hmm.
with Mars in strength, right? Mars is back in Scorpio, which is very, I think, key to remember too, because we're getting to the point where Mars is in the territory of where it seeded its synodic cycle to begin with. So
That's a good point. Yeah.
it's like not only is it strong in Scorpio, but its whole solar agenda is in this area of your chart too, where Pluto wasn't here. I don't think Pluto wasn't here when no, because that was the end of 2023. Was that Pluto was in Aquarius in
I don't
November of
think so.
2023? I don't think so. Um, So it just makes me think of like how that's activated too. But it's a heck of a chart here to bring us into Libra season,
Yeah.
especially with Venus and Virgo too. So we have this
Hmm.
ruling this whole zone, and she just got Uranified a little bit. She also just came off of a sextile to Mars, right? I mean, it looks like she was hanging out with Mars there too. Maybe a little bit before then.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we talked about that already. Yeah, that
Yeah.
shit, that
So,
sextile.
okay.
That
So
was back
let's,
in Leo and Libra. But yeah, you can go forward, I think.
yeah, let's move on.
Especially you can
So,
probably go into October, I think. I mean, I was one reason about again, I mean, it's like when we were talking about, oh, it's less chaotic, it's like relatively speaking for the year, but I feel like October, we're still adjusting to Saturn being back in Pisces. And Neptune is creeping back to that zero
ooh,
Aries powerful point right
getting
here.
close.
Um as
We got some Venus South Node action
Yeah, Venus does move over the
on
south node.
October 4th.
Hmm.
Um, I know, I feel like once we get into Libra season, we're sort of like given a second.
After we get out of that's really volatile around the equinox, but once we get into this point here of October, before Mercury goes into Scorpio, Mercury squares Jupiter, which is nice, and then Mercury gets into Scorpio, and now we have Mercury and Mars just traveling together in Scorpio
mm,
for a while, which is a time period, always you always like to talk about, just beware of like getting into verbal fights and conflicts but with our work and stuff, this can be very um generative for really probing into things because we've got
yeah.
Mercury with Mars. And what I really like about this period is it's an interesting phenomenon. And as this month goes along, Mercury and Mars will be heading towards a trine with Jupiter and Saturn. Now, Jupiter and Saturn won't ever become exactly trine, but they get very close.
Yeah,
And we
around
start
here.
getting this thing. We keep talking about how we keep having these air triangles, but now because Saturn's back in Pisces, Jupiter's in Cancer, we start getting these water triangles coming. Oh, actually, this is an important one. We should stop there. Sorry. With Venus going into Libra.
I know.
Yeah.
I was pointing out
Um, yeah.
because Venus gets into Saturn's territory
Yeah, yeah, that's an important
October,
one there. Yep.
and
Yep.
and really she's to speak to actually kind of what you were saying before with the uh Jupiter Saturn piece, and we're getting to our grand water trine. Uh, Venus might not be in a grand water trine, but she is working with the Jupiter Saturn component, right? She makes a
Mm-hmm.
sextile to Jupiter on the October 8th and then goes
Yeah.
on to oppose Saturn around
Yeah.
October 11th.
So that October 11th, Venus opposite Saturn will harken back to maybe some of those Virgo eclipse things that came up before and they were opposing Saturn.
Oh, hold
Um,
on. Gray, I
as
think we
far
kind
as
of, sorry. I think we skipped over something.
Oh, maybe we did. Sorry if we did.
No, no. Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it just dawned on me that in our excitement of Libra season starting, we kind of glossed over the Uranus-Pluto trine
Oh, okay. What
that
day is
happened.
that? What?
Um, what day is that? I'm like trying to move it. Oh yeah, so basically it looks like it's the 23rd. Oh, so that was going on. Basically, no, we kind of talked about it, but
No,
we didn't talk about it because essentially it's like the ingress.
they're very
Uh,
close, but I don't think they do. They actually trine there. I didn't have it.
yeah, they
Oh, they get an exact trine. Okay.
oh no, they get an exact trine, I think, on
I'm
that hold on.
I I left
Yeah,
that
September
off of my.
23rd. So basically the day after the ingress. Not to take you back or anything,
Oh,
but
the Sun trine. I thought you meant Pluto. Sorry. Yes, so the Sun and Uranus trine, but it is also a Pluto trine. Yeah,
Uranus trines. Why didn't it go
yeah.
to the exact? I'm sorry, I'm
Well,
having a
it's
Mercury
Sun.
retrograde moment here.
well, you put in the sun.
Oh,
You went to
thank
the
you.
sun Uranus trine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, we're 2020. No, it doesn't happen. Oh
Yeah,
my
I didn't,
gosh.
okay.
Gray,
I didn't have it written down, so
how
I
did
wasn't sure if
I?
I'd missed it.
I'm
It's very close.
I'm sorry,
Um,
folks. I didn't mean to take you
no,
all the way back.
no problem.
I
I
didn't
mean,
mean that.
there's something interesting dealing back to that air trine though. I mean, so one thing about that is then if you go back forward again to
Uh,
I don't think where we were.
I know. I totally messed that up.
Maybe like October 6th, oh, October 11th. We had the full moon in Aries on October 6th, and then
I brought us back to Venus, Saturn.
October 11th is the Venus Saturn. But that equinox chart, it's close, but it's an exact Uranus Sun trine, Sun Pluto trine. Just the Pluto Uranus isn't exact.
The sun's
Um,
bridging the gap,
but we
basically.
have an air triangle there, which starts off the whole order, which is really interesting. But then what happens here is Venus activates Saturn, and then it's a couple of days after this, October 13th, Venus goes into Libra, and we get another trine. I mean, there's a
Ah,
series of there's that one air trine at the Libra ingress. Venus sets off another air trine here. And then there's the other thing I've jumped ahead talking about, but then we start getting these water trines, triangles. Like I mean, they're grand water trines, grand air trines, if you want to use that term. But so there's something I like. There's a lot of flow and creative flow and a lot of things coming together in this period. And even though we know it's going to be a volatile time of change, compared to the rest of the year, I really like October. Now, of course, that Venus opposite Saturn temporary transit isn't the easiest in the world, but it's not like earlier in the year Venus retrograding with Saturn for a really long time.
true, true.
Um,
It's more about
and
her
so, and it will be,
activating Saturn,
it might,
Neptune.
yeah, and it might be a return actually back to that Venus retrograde material there. But I feel like in general, oh, that's a big thing. Yeah. What day is that Neptune goes back into Pisces? It's
So, uh, October 22nd. So there's
October
actually a
22nd.
lot that
Yeah.
happens. It's like Mercury
Yeah,
conjuncts
that's
Mars, Neptune moves, a lot of water. Mercury conjuncts Mars
yeah.
and Scorpio, Neptune moves back into
No, this is great to
Pisces.
well that Scorpio new moon is what?
I think it's actually
Oh
isn't
no, it's
it
a
it's
Virgo one
it's
still.
a
It's a
Libra. It's a
Libra new
Libra
moon.
new
Yeah,
moon.
sorry. Yeah, it's October 21st. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's a that yeah. So this new moon here has the in Libra on October 21st. It's at the very end of Libra, 28 degrees. Mercury and Mars are together, and this is where you can see they're coming in. They're both heading into a water triangle with Jupiter and Saturn, just as Venus has left forming that that air triangle with Uranus and Pluto. So I really like this. And then this is right before, like the day before, right? Pretty much. Yeah, literally the next day after this new moon, Neptune finally goes back to Pisces. But I mean, again, it's Neptune at that zero Aries point.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. And then Neptune comes back to Pisces. So what I like about all these triangles coming in, what I think there's something really about returning back to that Saturn and Pisces balsamic cauldron and things dissolving and mutating and shifting and you're kind of redreaming things, but all these air triangles coming in, these water triangles coming in. I mean, the air triangles that the Sun and Venus sets off is we're kind of used to that. There's lots of air movement this whole year, but the water triangles coming in, I think, can be really great for that inner dreaming and inner inner visioning. Yeah, just kind of feeling
Yeah.
into the presence of what's going on. Yeah,
I
maybe
feel
it may,
well,
mm,
I'm just thinking about the whole because essentially what you're saying is we get this air grand trine, and then we get this
Mm-hmm.
water grand trine. And so we kind of
Mm-hmm.
like lifted up in this airy space of like
Yeah.
conception and
Yep.
rationalization and
And
like seeing things.
ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we drop down into the
Yep.
emotional component. And I think one of the things I just wanted to bring up real quick before we glossed over because we talked about the Venus, Pluto, Uranus component. Um, well, Pluto's stationing at this exact time to go
Oh, right.
direct.
We did jump
So,
over that.
yeah, it does add a little extra oomph to this particular moment that Venus picks up on, which is always, Pluto stationing, especially direct, right? It's emerging again. So,
No, this is a powerful chart on this day.
yeah, on
October
October
13th,
13th,
14th.
14th,
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
And I think that's the first time Pluto has stationed direct in Aquarius, right?
yes, correct.
So that's significant. And yeah, we got, and yeah, and the moon setting it off too. So yeah, that's a great point that you made, that these air triangles coming in during this first part of the Libra season are very like lots of ideas and insights and lots of movement and change. And there's something about we get then really drop down
Yeah.
as Neptune comes back into Pisces. We're going within to some sort of interior process. But
Which is so interesting. Just think about like, because obviously it's probably going to be jumping around Libra season and the air time, and everybody's out socializing and we're talking about
mhm,
ideas and getting excited. And then all of a sudden we're like, okay, I need time to myself to like drop in and like get into this watery, very personalized, only the people that are close to me zone. So it's they both have their like perspective highs of flow, but for like different reasons. One that's more outwardly based, and then one that's really internal in feel, to at least how I'm kind of picking it up.
mhm.
Um, yeah, then we get that square there. Okay, so we're in
So
Scorpio season.
yeah,
Yeah, go
it's
ahead.
these days right here that you're on, the 24th, the 25th, 27th, 29th. They're all, Mercury is moving through a trine with Jupiter, then Saturn, then Neptune. And then as that happening, Mars is coming into a trine with Jupiter. And then as Mars is trining Jupiter and moving into a trine with Saturn and Neptune, Mercury goes into Sagittarius and opposes Uranus. So we really get this whole thing here.
Like a hot pocket.
Yeah, it really is. And this is as the moon's waxing. Um, So the Mars coming in Scorpio, if you just think more on personal levels of what we want to do in our world and stuff in
Oh,
life, I do think this could hopefully be pretty generative. Now the other thing is, of course, Mercury. We haven't talked about this yet, but Mercury has been in the retrograde shadow zone, right? And would already be starting to slow down. I forget what day. Um,
Mercury stations on November 9th, and then Jupiter
okay,
stations on November 11th. So we kind of so basically
yeah.
Mercury stations in Jupiter's sign as Jupiter is stationing. So we kind of get this
hmm
double whammy.
Yeah, I mean, this
Um,
is big though. This is our first time with Mercury and Sagittarius opposite Uranus and
yes.
Gemini,
So around
and
October, that's my dad's birthday, October
oh,
29th.
nice.
So let's see what his year looks like. I also noticed that on the same day too, that we have Mars actually returning to its synodic cycle degree of 25
Oh wow.
degrees
Mm.
Scorpio, and then just happens to make this grand water trine with Jupiter and Saturn at the same time. And so, uh, like obviously Mars and the sun are getting close to their dance of what the closure could look like. But uh
Yeah, but I mean, especially when we think about it compared to the rest of the year, I feel like this is that a period where we can hopefully do some restoration
yeah,
and productive growth forward, checking in with ourselves about what's working, what's not working with whatever it is that's been going on this year. And I like the flowing trines through this period.
Yeah, especially with Neptune back in Pisces and like the moon crossing over it. It's just, yeah, it feels like Mercury's gearing up to, go retrograde. There's a lot to sort of process and sit with,
Yeah, at
especially
this
after a
point,
busy
yeah.
year, right?
Yeah, it's at this point here where you are like November 3rd, November 4th that Mercury's starting to slow down for sure. I think it's around November 9th that Mercury goes retrograde.
Hmm. Yeah, so
Um,
basically, this is kind of a hot pocket in the sense of just shifts because Mercury's slowing down. Mars moves into Sagittarius and opposes Uranus. And then Venus
it's a full
squares
moon. Mhm.
Pluto, and Uranus moves back into Taurus,
Yeah.
all in a couple days, period, and a full moon to boot
Yeah,
on top of that. So
it's a full moon at the same time. So
it's a lot. Right, right,
yeah,
yeah. Enjoy your moment with the grand water trines because
yeah, we're back into it
early
here. But
November, yeah.
yeah, but still, I still like those that. But I mean, again, it's one of those things where it's just this little moment, and then the Mars opposite Uranus could set some things off for sure.
Well, I think that's
Um,
actually a good point, what you just said. There's this little moment. That sometimes is
mhm.
the case when we have like a lot of shifting energy or mutable energy, is it's not might not be a big long spell, but you take it when you can get it.
Yeah.
So say we have this pocket where it's like a week where we're like, okay, now I can like decompress, meditate, get into my zone. Like if you recognize the energy going in a direction, I think that's the beauty of mutable energy is it's really good at sensing sort of the tide and how to shift with it. And that's that adaptability
Hmm.
component. So if you have the moment, take it while it's here, utilize it, because chances are it's going to turn into, the next thing.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we could just say October is for the most part roughly that moment. I mean, if we can extend it to the whole month, it's not like it's all easy in October, but
It's the
relatively speaking, I like
easiest.
October. And then yeah, right, because early November, here comes Mars opposing Uranus. Mercury's going retrograde. But I do still like that full moon that you had up there. We're back to having because Uranus is about to come back to Taurus, but it isn't there. And so we actually get, for the first time in a really long time, an exalted full moon. And not only is it an exalted full moon, but the moon is applying to sextile Jupiter in this exalted in the moon sign. So, this is again, take what you can get. I like all things being, I like this is a nice full moon here. But Mercury is stationing at the same time. So it is a full moon that hopefully can provide some nice stabilizing, grounding in a Taurus way. As we have the stationing Mercury right here, you definitely want to be bringing a lot of mindfulness in with that because it's a stationing Mercury that has Mars moving away from an opposition with Uranus towards
I
the
know
stationing
it's
Mercury. So it's pretty electric.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is a funny full moon actually, because it's like
Yeah.
in one area you can find your peace and your stability, but then there's these
Yeah.
other areas of life that are getting electrified and lit up,
Yeah.
and then essentially the moon is ruled by Venus, who is in domicile, right? But she's at the
Yeah.
tail
She's
end,
in
and
Libra.
but
Yeah.
she feels the square of Pluto
So we
coming
gotta
on,
take what we
you
can
know.
get. I mean, this
But yeah,
year, I mean, relatively speaking, this is like this is like maybe another year you'd be like, oh wow, but this year it's like this is looking a lot more. I mean, the Mars Uranus opposition, I get it. That's definitely something.
yeah, but
But otherwise it's not compared to the rest of the stuff we've been looking
Yeah,
at
it's
there.
like take what you can get, like take it on the full
Yeah.
moon, right? And the day after where we get a little Jupiter, but then you're gonna get that Mars Uranus component like a day or so later. So
Yeah.
enjoy your Taurus moment and then know that not too long after we have essentially that Mercury stationing retrograde. Um
Yeah.
so much happens. So Venus square
Yeah, I mean,
Pluto, Uranus move
yeah, so it's interesting. It's a
mm.
full moon in Venus's sign. We're saying it's nice, but then it's almost like right away, like you're showing here.
What I think's
Um,
fantastic, or what I think's interesting, Gray, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, is the same day Uranus moves back into Taurus. Venus
Hmm.
squares Pluto, but Venus squares Pluto after Uranus moves back in. So it's like we come back into Uranus Taurus territory, and immediately it's ruled by a different planet that has the pressure of the Pluto square behind it. It's like it's an interesting arrival back to its territory.
No, it is. It's fairly interesting. I mean, it's a full moon in Taurus. Venus is still in Libra for the full moon, ruling the moon full moon. But then it's like within a couple days, right? Venus leaves her home sign of Libra. She goes into her opposite sign of Scorpio, squares Pluto, and then Uranus comes back into Taurus, like you were just saying. Yeah, I mean, it's like it is. It's like that full moon. It really is like enjoy this full moon because then we're like, bam, we're into some deeper stuff here. And yeah, again, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But like we were saying with Saturn, Neptune, it's like Saturn, Neptune gets something going in Aries, and you might have these real interesting new things happening. That's going to happen with Uranus and Gemini, but then we're going to go back. And now what's interesting here is I guess the Venus Pluto square, which is kind of like kick us into a deeper layer of whatever this is, but we're now back to reckoning again with what we're used to, Uranus and Taurus, Neptune and Pisces, Saturn
Yes,
and Pisces.
interesting.
Yeah, and again, I don't know what to say about it besides I feel like we're coming something gets awakened in movement, but then we've got to kind of go back and look at some other
And
layer of
what
yeah, what are you gonna say? Sorry.
no, the what I think I'm just adding to what I feel like you're going to say because
Hmm.
it's it's a perfect setup for it, right? We
Hmm.
got Mercury retrograding at this time. We got
Hmm.
Jupiter retrograding November 11th. And so
Yeah, that's
going
a good
back into
point.
territory,
That happens right after this. Yeah.
and then we get
Hmm.
this sweet moment of what you were talking about before, where now the sun is in the grand water trine.
Hmm.
Look at it. Actually, I stopped at an interesting moment where it's like kind of doing a Solomon seal.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so it's almost like you said, we have to kind of reckon with this old territory. But luckily, we get a Mercury retrograde, Jupiter retrograde, the sun tapping into the Jupiter Saturn piece. It's like this is our moment in Scorpio season to also reconnect with the change and what needs to be cleared out or healed or worked through or internalized, what have you.
Yeah. And at the same time, basically Jupiter is stationing that's when I think it's like the day after, but basically at the same time, Mercury and Mars come into that conjunction. So that's definitely something there where the beginning of this Mercury retrograde phase is got some kind of more of a disruptive we are feeling into that thing like you're saying, but there is something here where, sometimes we have these with the Mercury retrograde where there's something difficult that comes in at the beginning with Mars. So this will change though because Mercury is going back to Scorpio. And we can see, right, if you look at this chart, who's coming up in Scorpio is, besides the sun, is Venus. So it's probably a Mercury retrograde that starts off with more of an issue. It might relate to the exact same stuff you're talking about, and we're adjusting to this, but I think it's a Mercury retrograde where things will work out in the end. It's gonna maybe be some hard stuff we gotta change or look at here around November 13th, 12th. Yeah.
Which, yeah, and it's interesting just because of the retrograde. I mean, Mercury conjunct Mars on October 19th, but in a different zone, right? So not to say it's
Hmm.
the same storyline, but it's definitely a different quality. I mean, I also feel like maybe whatever it is we do have to work out, we do have the resources or the vision for it because I mean both Mars and Mercury are ruled by that Jupiter and the sun's moving to
Hmm.
trine it and has that grand water trine. So there's like at least awareness sort of tapped into whatever is going on with Jupiter that's kind of behind. Uh the Venus-Mars
Yeah,
component.
there's almost like there's some kind of thing with issue there with the Mars, but at the same time, Jupiter also stationing. So now they're all going retrograde. Jupiter's retrograde on top of Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn. And often that Jupiter stationing is sort of taking us in to start reviewing the growth. Like
Yeah.
there's something it's very kind of perfect then with the sun coming in. And what's nice is as the sun comes in here, is that Mars, thankfully that Mars Mercury is temporary and they're moving away from each other. And so by the time we get to like November 16th and the 17th, we have that water triangle and we have
Let's look at this new moon.
yeah, yeah, look the new moon. That's it.
Yeah. Oh, look at that new moon Mercury Cosimi on November
Yeah.
20th.
Yep.
Yeah. Trining the,
Opposite
yeah, there's our grand water trine right there.
and opposite Uranus.
Oh, I forgot Uranus is back in
But it's
Taurus.
another one of these it's funny like I mean it used to be really popular when I was growing up and learning astrology when I was a young man. Terms like the kite were
Yeah.
like that was just very normal astrology that I was and I feel like there's been a tendency now with like younger people getting into traditional they don't use the kite terminology. That's there's all these things like the mystical rectangle and the kite and all
Mm-hmm.
these names or configurations. There's so many kites though this year.
So
They
many.
keep happening, and it'll be interesting to see how we all what we all feel about experiencing this over and over again. And this is a really fascinating one where now it's Uranus is that piece that's out there holding the opposition. And now it's this water triangle. Yeah, that's involving a lot. Saturn, Neptune, Jupiter, Sun, Moon, Mercury. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And then we got
And
this
you
outlier of Mars and Sag
Mars.
like ruling it, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
near Antares, so that's potent.
where we just
Um,
had our new moon actually
yeah,
on Taurus.
and also coming into the nodal square and
Yes.
down there at the southern bending. So yeah, there's
Yeah.
some real Scorpio depth here to feel into things. And again, because it's opposite Uranus, um, we've had a lot of those lunations before. We've had the full moons a lot with Uranus. We don't get that this time around, but we do get the new moon opposite Uranus and Taurus. I think this has got to be I'm guessing this is the
I
last
feel like it's
one.
the last one.
Yeah, it's got to be the last one opposite it. So,
It'll definitely be that. But it adds a
um,
lot of like, if this isn't a moment for your Uranus and Taurus journey,
yeah, really, it is.
you
This is
can
a yeah,
compile everything that Uranus and Taurus has brought to your life to some extent, or that area, and
yeah.
this is a huzzah, like
It's very powerful again for what we've already been talking about, reconciling
yes,
this. How are we dealing with more interior, emotional, imaginal processes relating to all the big changes that have happened this year? Because Mercury's now there too, like at the conjunction point in the heart, going into the heart of the sun with this new moon in the trine with Saturn and Neptune. So this is a really deep moment, opposite Uranus. So there's really activation here of some perhaps really big insights about this.
yeah, and that trine to Neptune too. It's like it feels to me like this kind of liberating moment, but also this like dissolving moment. Like it, either your head's in the right place or you get the right information, and it just puts the necessary elements before you that can clear the path or awaken something or uh, I don't know. Especially with Mars in Sagittarius, because Mars does have sort of that more enthusiasm and that visionary quality and that preparatory space for being very ready for change and inspired by it, and it's feeling the pressure of the bending of the nodes, right? And so
Hmm.
this is like an opportunity of a lunar cycle that can really clear up like unfinished business so that
Hmm.
new things can begin. Um, Especially
Yeah,
because once we get
absolutely.
into Sag season, we're going to have a bunch of nodal squares. A bunch of planets are going to go through the bendings of the nodes,
Yeah.
and I think that's yeah, that's always activating. We got Saturn and Neptune that station direct at that time. So there's something about this lunar cycle that kind of gives us that moment, like that you kind of started off the podcast with talking about how
Yeah.
important it is to transition the old story.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But the other then as this cycle goes forward, the basically Mercury's going back towards Venus, who's now joining the water triangle, right? So
Oh, look
now
at that.
we have a Venus Mercury in the water triangle. And this is why I feel like whatever does happen there at the beginning with the Mercury Mars issue that comes up at the beginning of the Mercury retrograde, I think we figure out it can work out here. Um, Whatever that is. And then basically as they're separating and Mercury's stationing direct a few days later,
Mhm.
Venus is heading through, finishing the rest of
So
that trine. Yeah.
let's stop at the this okay. Yeah, she's finishing, so let's compile this moment all together because she's
Yeah.
finishing up this grand water trine
Hmm.
while Saturn stations direct.
Oh, right. That's the same
So
time. Yeah.
yes, so she trines Saturn as
Hmm.
it's stationing on November 27th, and then on November 29th, Mercury stations direct too. And then Venus poses Uranus. So that's a little like we get sort of these emerging planets of both Mercury and Saturn, and then Venus is sort of in the mix um, at the tail end of the sign, and then
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's extremely powerful. I'm trying to remember when,
especially and the moon just moves over it on November 29th. Moon in
Neptune.
Pisces, yeah,
Yeah, Neptune
interesting.
station's less than 2 weeks from now, but it's not that close. So yeah, the fact that that Saturn stations here, this is our final station direct in Pisces. This is the final moment of all the Saturn big lessons. It's not over here because Saturn's going to take some time to get out of Pisces, but they definitely get really amplified and intensified here. So that yeah, that's one of those moments where you're speaking of. I think it's like one of the more powerful ones with Mercury also stationing direct that we really get that insight into this the Pisces sort of. It's like this is like that ultimate kind of heading into that phase of the Saturn Neptune balsamic Pisces
Yeah.
phase that we get, yeah. And then like you're showing here, Venus moves through the Uranus opposition, and then
Hmm.
by early December she's in Sagittarius. And that'll be a big change because Mercury's still involved in the water triangle, but Mercury's now direct. And Mercury is at least moving forward now in the water triangle. And then Venus going into Sagittarius is definitely going to pick up a lot more pace and lightness. And so there's a really important, I mean, November is appropriately internally intense for Scorpio. And then as we hit December and the sun's further along in Sagittarius here, I think there's a lot of forward
Yeah.
movement coming in here. Yeah.
Well, especially because I think that our Gemini full moon on December 4th, it has a special oomph to it because this is
Hmm.
it's basically in a grand cross with the nodes.
Hmm.
So we're at this halfway point of eclipse seasons. And we're in a new eclipse story, right? With the whole Pisces Virgo. We're in the mutable eclipse territory. And we went through all this clearing, we went through all this cleansing, we went through the grand water trines, we processed Saturn moving direct, and now we're in this mutable transition change space. And there's something about, I think, this time. I mean, granted, it'll be holiday time, people are going to be moving and doing a lot of things. Uh, but I think there'll be bigger storylines that are shifting just because I always feel like that's the nature of the sun at the bending of the nodes is like, okay, the clock turns and now your story is twisting.
Yeah, it definitely is. And then the other thing that's just amplifying what you're already saying is that right after this, Mars then comes into squaring Saturn.
Yeah. Oh, fun.
So
Yeah, that's
that's
nice.
definitely another big, there's some challenging stuff there that's going to come up. But again, what
Eh,
happens here, this final part of the year is that full moon wasn't exactly square Saturn Neptune, but it was only like what 12, 13 degrees away from squaring Saturn Neptune,
mm.
and Mars comes in to square them right away. We start getting more like Saturn Neptune just keep getting kind of hit with aspects. Now we're not getting the water triangle. Well, we are here, but we will eventually move out of the water triangle. What's interesting here, though, is we still have the water triangle, but now Mercury is moving direct in Scorpio. So that's just why it's such an extended water triangle. But it's Mercury direct now, and Mercury is able to really be working with Mercury's gonna be picking up speed here, and this is the time to really there's some kind of Mars Saturn Neptune tension getting activated here,
Yeah, this is an important
catalytic,
moment.
but Mercury coming forward across the water triangle, opposing Uranus again. Now you have Mercury back in Sag here. Yeah,
I think
there's
the
big forward
Mhm.
movement. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. The I well, hearing you talk, I think what comes out the most to me here is just the Mars movement because the Mars
Mm-hmm.
movement is accentuating obviously the Mars Saturn piece, but
Mm-hmm.
Mars bridges the Saturn Neptune gap while Neptune is stationing direct. So there's this like intensification and activation of what Saturn Neptune at the tail end of Pisces is by Mars riling it up, right? It's square to Saturn on the 8th. Neptune
Yeah,
stations direct on the 10th. Then
yeah.
then Venus, Mercury opposing Uranus on the 10th. Venus squaring the nodes on the
Venus
10th.
squaring the nodes on the 10th. Yeah.
There's just like a
Mercury,
culmination of
what's
everything.
interesting is I didn't realize it before, but that full moon in Gemini actually it was is within a week of Neptune stationing. So it's definitely going there. But then yeah, like you're showing right as Neptune is stationing direct, Mercury comes through with this trine. So it's very similar to how we saw earlier when Saturn was stationing direct. We also had the trines coming in Scorpio. So and but then Mars is squaring Saturn Neptune. So and what's also happening earlier in the astrology, Mars would have set into darkness, and so what is interesting here, and Venus also set into darkness. So what's interesting here is we do have Mars squaring Saturn and Neptune, but it's a Mars that is not visible, and
Mm.
the sun is heading towards Mars. Now, Mars is a planet that does pretty well, all things being equal combust because it tends to still it's Mars. It doesn't mind being all fired up by it's not being burned by the sun or whatever. So this is really interesting because it makes me think we already could think about Saturn, Neptune in Pisces, balsamic phase, like the unseen and invisible and the hidden and these other worlds but they're getting activated by this Mars that's invisible, and then the sun's going to activate them, and then Venus is going to come through and she's also invisible. So yeah, it's very interesting and definitely makes me think about big inner visioning. Um, related to, yeah, your life here. I think that Neptune station will be quite significant. That will be the last stationing
Yeah.
direct of Neptune in Pisces. We'll be getting closer to the end of that transit now, because Neptune will slowly move forward and leave Pisces for good after this. But that won't happen till like January. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
this new moon is really powerful.
On December 19th, we got a
Hmm.
new moon that is squaring essentially Saturn Neptune, but really Neptune, of recently stationed Neptune. Venus is in proximity.
Yep,
Um,
Venus is squaring Saturn and Neptune. Yeah, this is where I was saying, like, we're right at the solstice here. Um, Mars went into Capricorn on the 14th, so about 5 days before this. So we do have Mars exalted here in a pretty powerful place. But yeah, I mean this is what I keep thinking about, is how much
mm,
this Saturn
this is
Neptune
interesting.
thing just keeps getting contacted by things.
So the
Oh,
ruler of this new moon is
mm,
Jupiter squaring Chiron.
Chiron, that is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know someone had made a comment in our earlier video how she was kind of, since we didn't really talk about it at all, she was kind of interested in the fact that Chiron was at 19 degrees of Aries for months, which was the solar eclipse degree earlier this year, and especially US going through the Chiron return,
Yeah,
sort of
no,
what that
that's
could bring up.
yeah. There's just so much to talk about. It's hard to work
I know, we
Chiron
can't
in,
talk
but
about it all.
um I do think Chiron's important. Yes, like Chiron contact to the eclipse has been important, and um
Yeah. The
trying to, I mean, again, it makes me think a lot about the unseen. I mean, one thing, you can take Chiron in all kinds of ways, and in mundane astrology, it can have some pretty difficult correlations with events that can happen in the world, and difficult events. So that could be part of this. And obviously, new moon squaring Saturn and Neptune isn't gonna be probably the most beautiful time in the world either, necessarily. I mean, but I think again for inner visioning, it's all very powerful, and Chiron is about inner visioning. It is about getting help from guides and spirit guides and the unseen, and from ancestors, and working through ancestral issues. When you had brought that up before about ancestral issues connected to what's going on, Chiron is a point, a symbol that can speak to that. I definitely think Chiron and Aries square Jupiter and Cancer would speak to that. So that could be that'd be a way I would think about
Mhm.
how this could be more empowering. Also, things that we're working through here, just deep issues that could have a chironic ability, that we're working through stuff here that's going to be could be really important, that becomes part of our practices and things we do in our community, or working with others in some way.
Yeah, there could be something about chironic work that is activating to your actual mission or your journey, or perhaps what it is you're imagining and shifting for yourself. There, it brings up certain woundings or poisons that you're like, well, in order for
Hmm.
me to grow, I have to nurture these parts of myself, and I can't be triggered or activated by them. And so I kind of wonder too if it's in order to move forward in life or to make inner peace or change belief systems, it could be a very Sagittarius thing. There's sort of this activation of what that looks like in your personal story and how to extract the wisdom out of it, right? Because it's Jupiter and Chiron together, and there are teachings here. There is something to gain, even through like difficulty.
Yeah,
So
one thing I think about, if you are somebody that celebrates the holidays, and whatever holidays those are for you, or celebrate the solstice, whether you're in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, I guess one thing I could think about this is, when we look at, okay, here comes the sun, we have these squares to Saturn coming in here with Venus, but maybe think about how could you just like put your energy into creating some nice celebration for yourself or friends or family or in your community. um there's and I think also with all of these transits, it makes me think too that even because this is a year, this year and next year, there's going to keep being all these really intense looking transits. I think sometimes I get too caught up in the meaning of what future transits are going to be for us. And there's something about this solstice period here in particular, as you know, Saturn and Neptune and are direct in Pisces and they're moving forward. They're now heading towards their conjunction that will happen in a couple months. At that first, the actual conjunction, the real conjunction that becomes exact in the first degree of Aries. So I think there's a something about being present. I feel like is just going to be so important here. Just really embracing the experience that you're in here and what's going on with your life and what you want to, do in your relationship. You know what? I don't know. There's just it's a very powerful that new moon is so close to the solstice, and so the solstice is like has this very like new moon quality. That's something I like for it being like coming to the end of the year.
Yeah,
The
that's the first thing I noticed is that new
yeah,
moon quality. It kind of felt like,
yeah,
that's nice. It's like a breath of fresh Capricorn.
yeah. And there's something very Saturn Neptune, whatever that is for you, and this deeper dream and new perception of your life that's getting really activated here because we got the new moon squaring them and Venus is coming through. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, essentially that brings us to the final days of 2025. Venus just rounds her journey out basically with the squares to Saturn and Neptune, and then she moves into Capricorn and
Yeah. I mean, there's one thing I would say, just we can say kind of quick, is exactly what you're showing is that as she goes into Capricorn, you can see they're all heading together there. We have Venus only 3 degrees away from the sun. The sun's only 3 degrees away from Mars. So, we can see Mars is coming to the end of its cycle. Venus is coming to the end of her cycle.
yeah.
And yes, it's true. They do all end up converging, and that takes us slightly into 2026. But I think it's important just to note that this really powerful new moon, kind of right before the solstice, basically waxes right across the new year. So we get this like we enter the new year in 2026 right as a full moon is coming in. It's but January 3rd, just a couple of days into the new year.
It's my partner's
It's
birthday.
Oh, yeah, awesome. It's with
Hmm.
Jupiter, and you can see, yeah, look at, I mean, Venus, and they're so close to this new cycle, and that just happens a few days later. Let's see, the new Venus cycle is on January 6th, the new Mars cycle is on January 9th, and we get Venus and Mars coming together, essentially
Mm,
opposite Jupiter with the sun. This is a very different new, it's very much this new Venus Mars cycle. It has this very new
interesting.
quality with Jupiter, really different than these recent ones with like they're in Aquarius with Pluto.
Pluto, I know.
Yeah. And
Oh my
so
God.
this is or yeah, so there's some I really so we have to kind of extend into a week for this of the 2026, but there is something important about there is this real new cycle coming in here. We have that new moon at the solstice, and then we have new Venus Mars cycles starting up very soon into the new year. And again, 2026 is most likely even more eventful and even more fully pushing us into these changes that we've already been talking about in 2025. That does not end.
Yeah.
We only deepen and extend and accelerate into whatever these new changes are. And I think a lot of times when we have these podcasts for the year ahead, it's always interesting to think, well, where are people now listening to it in December and where are they going to be at this point? I think where we are right now and where we are here at this chart is probably the most, maybe perhaps the most dramatic difference with people, with the exception of 2020. Because 2020 was we knew a lot was happening that year, but so much is happening that I had a recent Patreon meeting. So my Patreon, if people are ever interested in that and joining it on, if you're at least on the cedar tier or the oak tier, every new moon, shortly after the new moon, we have these salons where we just talk about the astrology and what's going on with people. And this woman in my in a group, Rachel, was talking. She's just was talking about, I forget now which deity, which gods it was, but it was like this image of the gods watching the formlessness and the fluctuations of like the formlessness of almost like chaotic primordial, like something's kind of taking shape, but it's like it's changing. And that's so much what this year is. And we're not going to really
Hmm.
end it being resolved. We're going to end it still in this change, but it's just something to embrace. And I like how the year ends with these new cycles coming in. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've even what you're just saying and what your patron shared and thinking about how that really weighs into the last things we talked about that until seeing this moment with Sun, Mars, Venus, Jupiter together, I think it adds just so much more to that crossing over that we saw of both Mars and Venus squaring Saturn and Neptune within that new moon cycle and them
Mm-hmm.
being
Yeah.
invisible, like sort of like the arrangement and the gods playing with just what you described there. That felt very
Mm-hmm.
much so, especially with more of
Mm-hmm.
the relational planets, right? Because we're talking about Venus and Mars here. So yeah,
Yeah. And
it's an interesting end of the year.
the Venus Mars cycle is always interesting. Sometimes they'll come together. It's always powerful. Sometimes they're visible, but it's also always interesting when it's one like this where they're invisible. But this one's particularly powerful because it's so close to their renewal, like it's all kind of together. So
Mm,
it's a really powerful one. And again, it might not be seen yet. It's like it's just kind of part of this inner change that's going to be kind of part of driving us through the next year. But if you're a Capricorn, well, Capricorn moon like yourself, or Capricorn rising, maybe you're a Capricorn sun, you just have something important Capricorn. This is a big deal that we once we get through 2025 that we have this new Venus Mars coming in here
yeah, I'm
for
already
that
looking
next
forward
cycle.
to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I'm already looking forward
With
to
the
it.
Jupiter, I like the Jupiter, the because it's also right. This is when I didn't fully bring this in, but this is Jupiter's synodic cycle, where Jupiter is as close to us as Jupiter ever gets,
Yeah.
and as this is a bright Jupiter is really a beacon of light, right? And as the sun setting with Venus and Mars sort of in the chariot of the sun, Jupiter's rising bright as it gets. So it's such a powerful like inner visioning of what you want and desire. So I really like that. It's almost like we extend out into this new terrain and we're really kind of brought into these water triangles. And then this is like a really nice earthy Capricorn, sea goat inner visioning, but it's like be more pragmatic and practical with that inner visioning, right? As we head into like what's going to probably take us 8 hours to talk about next year.
Yeah.
The
Oh, oh my
2026 astrology.
goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah. No, I do like the grounding element at the end here. We do need
Yeah.
we can benefit from some earth water after all the fire and air.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask the impossible of you, Gray, of if you had one word to describe 2025, what would it be?
Flux, I guess.
Flux.
Flux, but try to make the flux fun and
For the flux of it.
yeah, try to stay moving. I think I talked about this some in our last episode, but I think when I research, I've done a lot of research into Saturn, Neptune, and one thing that comes back to me a lot is just needing to intentionally create space and groups and getting together with people and create adventures and fun, excitement, and because there's a lot of really creative, dynamic movement. And we know the state of the world is troubling in many ways, and a lot of those things, I don't really see any necessarily resolution coming anytime soon. So we're having to hold all this stuff. So the more we can kind of get together and create, yeah, times to kind of celebrate and or get active about some issues that we care about, and finding other people that care about those issues with you and that kind of thing. I think that's going to be really important, being really intentional about creating that. I mean, people have already been talking about that. I know a lot about getting together more locally and getting in local groups because of all this digitizing of everything. But I think that'll be especially important this year.
Yeah. No, I think I totally agree with you. And it's important for us to do. And it's, I mean, I already feel it. Like I crave it. It's not something that I'm like seeking, like, I need to do this for myself. It's more, it feels like it's just naturally bubbling up where it feels like
Hmm.
the right thing to engage with. And I guess that's the beauty of the shift, right? Uh, I feel like part of your, like, to counter your flux. I think my
Uh-huh.
word is flow. So there's like
Flow,
this
yeah,
idea of
flow's
flux
good.
and
Hmm.
flow, like, because it's
Flux and flow.
both. Like, it's like,
It's definitely flow. It's not a time to be trying to hold on. You gotta um go down that river current, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
right. The
Hmm.
flux is here, so flow with it, right?
Hmm.
You feel the changes. You're getting excited in these new areas of your chart. Flow with it. Don't
Hmm.
fight it. Get excited about it.
Hmm.
Don't fight it, excite it. That's my Uranus and Gemini
That is,
quote there.
yeah.
Don't fight it, excite it.
Don't
Yeah.
fight it, excite it. Yeah.
Yeah. All that said, there's so much going on with this year. And to circle back to our original thing that we talked about, there's so much going on. There's so much uncertainty. There's so much potential. And within that, there can sometimes be fear,
Hmm.
but there doesn't have to be. I think fear is also another side component to excitement
Hmm.
because we fear what we might not know or don't have control over, but we can also get excited about how what that can look like in our life. So maybe I guess changing the narrative can be very helpful as you flux and flow through 2025.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It made me think of you would know this because I know it's part of your branding every podcast episode, but does the Empress card, does she have like a river stream behind her
I
or
think she
something?
does actually.
In the Pamela Coleman Smith version, yeah. Let's just imagine that she does.
So yeah, she has a river. I'm pretty sure she does. She has a river stream. And what's
Yeah,
also
I feel
interesting
like I thought
about
she
her,
does. Yeah. Hmm.
I also like why you're bringing up that card too, because
Yeah.
one of the things that's in it is that it contains a two crescent moons. So it contains a balsamic and it
Mm,
contains a waxing crescent. And so
mm,
there's this idea with any birth, there's a death. So there's
mm.
this
Yeah.
connection with the end of the cycle to the beginning of the new cycle, and then the river that runs through it, essentially.
Yeah.
So yeah, given solid Empress vibes here.
Yeah, so I mean, with that Empress idea of how can you empower yourself and people help inspire people around you and support each other in having that sort of Empress quality of, guess we want a little bit Empress magician maybe, but to really not just be luxuriating, sitting back. So you're gonna have to be creating it. But what would be that vision you have of being more empress, enjoying having some those that creative fulfillment. It's not good. So I guess another thing that's really important with this and the flux and the flow is like what that vision even is. Like because we're talking about dreams changing and maybe before you wanted to make this much amount of money and have this kind of a car and that might not be it anymore for you. It might be more about just being really creatively fulfilled by what you're doing and whatever that is, right? And that's like what the Empress
Mm.
quality is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. I mean, essentially, the Empress is the divine feminine of the kind of the connection to the wild. It is nature.
Mm,
It's not the city. It's not the structure. It's more of that
mm,
wild impulse that can come up and drag you in by what calls
mm.
to you from like a more primal state of what you want to create. And so I think that's a wonderful sentiment to end on, not just Empress energy, but what you're speaking to right now about how dreams can change, visions can change. These
Yeah.
are all moving pieces. And so if we flux and flow with it and keep the overall intention of Empress energy in mind, um, yeah, we'll just have an easier time and quite possibly enjoy it.
Yeah, because especially some of those points where we're talking about, oh, maybe you have to let go of something or change this, or we're hitting the Saturn, Neptune, Pisces part. I think that's where we might really we'll feel the new impulses and new experiences. But then I think when it all comes back and Uranus comes back, that's where it might start hitting us the more internal levels. Like, this isn't the what I thought I wanted. That's not, I thought this was my dream and whatever that is. And actually, no, it's not. I want to do this other thing. I don't care about that. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's going
Yeah.
to be a big deal with this year. And getting clear about what that is, because you want to be moving into 20. If you're not already clear about what that is, getting more clear, but letting yourself be curious about how that could be changing. And then kind of going into 2026, so you're more fully embracing it because it even
Mhm.
gets even more going even more full on in 2026.
Yeah. Yeah. What I heard you saying is leaving room. There's like
Yeah.
leaving room with life. Oh my goodness, Gray, how did we end up going longer than the first one? How did we do this? Oh my goodness. Well, before we say adieu, uh, remind people where can they find you? What you got going on?
GrayCrawford.net is my website. And you can, if you want to talk about the astrology for what's going on next year or just the next month, you can book a consultation with me there. There's information there. I love working with people in consultations. I mentioned I do have a Patreon community that you can read about there where there's information I share that it only goes out to those people. And then there's also a couple tiers that have monthly meetings going on. And on the highest one where it's like a more of a monthly class I'm teaching, it's been about fixed stars for a while now. And I do have one event coming up, which is it's actually a perfect sync with what you said about the Empress card and the wilderness and the two moons is that I'm on December 13th for the if you watch this before December 13th of 2024, I am doing a talk for the Astrology Society of Kentucky, but I will not actually be in Louisville. It'll be online. And so if you're interested in that, it's going to be about Ceres. And a lot of people think about her being an asteroid. She's technically a dwarf planet now. And I've connected with her a lot. And I'm going to be talking about her. And she's all about the exact theme we ended on with the Empress in terms of there's like death, there's regeneration, there's mystery initiation, there's underworld processes, there's grief, but it's also she's the goddess of life and death and procreation. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out on my website.
All right. Definitely go check Gray out. He's always got something going on, been teaching a lot. There's lots of opportunities to connect. And your YouTube channel. Let's not
Oh
forget.
yeah, I am.
Let's not forget.
Yep, thank you. I do have a YouTube channel going on, which is new. That's the new thing when we were talking about all this stuff. That's been the new thing for me. And I'm going to be putting out more videos there. So you can check out my YouTube channel and please subscribe and like the videos there.
Yes, yes.
Um, so yeah,
All
I'll
right.
probably
So
be putting out more content about the stuff we've been talking about today.
yeah,
Yeah.
piecing it out as it
Yeah.
goes along. Yeah.
Hmm.
All right, we'll definitely go check Gray out. And while you're here, like and subscribe my channel if you haven't already. And if you'd like to share some of your thoughts on the second half of 2025 and everything that we discussed here today, which was a lot, I know. Um, Also, if you have one word to describe, I'd love to hear your one word for 2025. We'll get Uranus and Gemini on it, and we'll collect all our thoughts together, and maybe that will be what 2025 is like.
And
Um,
do you have another tarot deck coming out, or no, not for sale right now, or
Not for sale. Our tarot deck is sold out, but we are
it's sold out?
working on the second edition, and we are also working on an expansion pack. So that's what we're doing right
Cool.
now is we're creating new cards for the expansion pack. And so I have thrown together a new story or realization of the major cards, which is very exciting. And I think the cards Sarah Jane's turning out already are so magical. I can't wait to show you guys when we do our next Kickstarter. So stay tuned for that. That'll probably be in spring of 2025. But in the
Oh,
meantime, yeah, in the meantime, I'm just doing my YouTube. I'm working on some things that are a little hush hush now that Mars is going retrograde, but I'm feeling really inspired about what 2025 is going to bring as far as what I get to offer. Not just me, but perhaps other people as well. And so you'll have to stay tuned for that, which you can do so here on this channel at energeticprinciples.com, Instagram at energetic principles, all those places. So it helps if you share, like I said, like, subscribe, share with a friend, spread the good word, leave a review if you're listening to the podcast, because all those things help in the algorithm world, you know. You have to engage for the algorithm to like me. So, oh my goodness. We didn't even talk about algorithms. Okay. So I'm just thinking Uranus, Pluto. Ah. All right, Mel, calm down. Calm down. That was a lot. Gray, thank you for joining me for a total of 7 whole hours to talk about
yeah,
2025. I'm very grateful, and I hope the listeners are too.
yeah, my pleasure. It's a lot to talk about.
So much. All right, friends. Well, we wish you the best out there. Cool your jets with Mars retrograde as we get ready to go into 2025 because it's going to be a big one. So yeah, get ready. Yeah, enjoy your holidays. Happy New
Yeah.
Year. And as always, may the stars be with you.